Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le Senator Gorst,
Présent.
Monsieur le Senator Farnham, Madame le Senator Ferguson, Monsieur le Senator Lafondre, Madame le Senator Valois,
Present.
Madame le Senator Moore,
Present.
Monsieur le Senator Pallet,
Présent.
Monsieur le Senator Mezek,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Helier,
No.
Sorry. I think we'll call that the next time round, greffier, as well.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent,
Present.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sever, Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brelade,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville, Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Sainte-Marie,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen,
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Martin,
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément, Madame le Deputy Martin,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern, Madame le Deputy de Grouville,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Lewis,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Tellier,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Higgins, Monsieur le Deputy Masson, Madame le Deputy Pinel,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Martin,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Ouen,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Dublé, Monsieur le Deputy Labbe,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Wickenden,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Sainte-Marie,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Truscott,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Young, Monsieur le Deputy Ash,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Morel,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Guida,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Pierre, Monsieur le Deputy de la Trinité, Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Jean, Madame le Deputy Lagre,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Aye,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Pershard, Monsieur le Deputy Ward,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Alves,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Pamplin,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Gardner.
Present.
Monsieur le greffier.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don des conseillers et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toutes les délibérations étant accompagnées de ta bénédiction, réussissent au bien et au soulagement du peuple qu'il te plut de commettre à leurs soins. Quand nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils, bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite dans la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et nous induis pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car toi, le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen. Monsieur le Senator Farnham,
Excusez.
Madame Santa Ferguson,
Excusez.
Monsieur Le Santa Lafondre,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier,
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sever,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Deputy Higgins,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Deputy Masson,
Excusez.
Madame le Deputy Doublé,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Young,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Deputy de la Trinité,
Excusez.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Jean,
Excusez.
Madame le Deputy Pesha.
Mallard.
Je jure que Madame le Deputy Pesha est tellement disposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister au tâche sans exposer sa santé.
Les états sont constitués. Before I resume the debate on the amendment P80, I was asked to make a ruling by email concerning the answer provided to written question 383, of which the Constable of St John asked of the Minister for Health and Social Services. The question was divided into 4 parts, and the answer provided was also in 4 parts, and the only query arises in connection with Part A. Although Part A was answered to a very significant extent, it did not directly address the state of the Minister's knowledge, which was the main thrust of that question. In other words, it asked whether the Minister was aware, and answer A did not provide that information. Accordingly, whereas the answer to a significant extent is in accordance with standing orders, to the extent that that part of question, Part A, was not answered in the way that it was asked, it is not in accordance with standing orders, and accordingly I direct that a revised answer be provided to that limited extent. Very well. We now resume the debate on the amendment to P80 lodged by the Future Hospital Review Panel, and next listed to speak is Deputy Lewis.
Thank you, sir. I did sort of shoot myself in the foot a little last night, so saying that I could finish in 5 minutes, take us up to 5:30, but I think that can still be accomplished by not repeating everything that everyone else has said. So I would like to hold my hand up and remind members that originally I was in favour of redeveloping the General Hospital in Gloucester Street. I had hoped we could purchase the hotels and guest house in Kensington Street and build a new wing there. We could then decant the older wings into the new Kensington wing, then demolish and rebuild them. But there were problems with this, as patients would have to put up with unbearable building noise, and the 1793 wing has protected status. Our predecessors did well extending the wonderful granite 1793 wing in Gloucester Street, with the parade wing, of course, and Gwyneth Hewlin wing and other extensions. One major problem with extending the Gloucester Street hospital is synergy. Nothing would be where it should be, and patients, doctors, nurses would have to walk long distances. I won't talk about the plumbing in the cellar, as that's been well covered. Besides the medical team, I'd also like to congratulate the maintenance team who kept this leaky old ship going through the years. Unfortunately, any rebuild there would only last about 10 years. The new hospital at Overdale would last at least 25 years before any major modifications are needed. You can only extend so much, then you must rebuild. Rebuild the hospital on a fresh site, a clean sheet so everything can be planned meticulously. That new site is Overdale, and when completed will be a first-class hospital. We cannot, however, delay, as to vote for the amendment would necessitate the redrawing of the plans and subsequently delay the building of the new hospital. It will cost a lot of money, sir, but it will last well into the future. In finishing, sir, I would be delighted if the new hospital was named the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member, Deputy of St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And having had our overnight course reflection, perhaps I could begin, sir, if you forgive me, by restating the main objects of this amendment. It is simply to restrict the size of the expenditure on the hospital, and in conjunction with that, restrict the amount of borrowing. There is no suggestion in our amendment that we need to relook at the site. That is a battle previously fought, and maybe not satisfied to everyone. We are where we are, as they say. Similarly, sir, we do not question for one moment the need for a new hospital, and those members who have emphasised that are, in a way, speaking the obvious. We are fully appreciative of that and wish to and endorse the need for a new hospital as soon as is proper. And further, sir, we do not need to be told that the new hospital is for the benefit of our children and grandchildren. That is very much in our thinking. But as the chair of the review panel mentioned in her opening remarks, and as confirmed by our own advisors, the problem is that we have not sufficient information to determine whether the actual cost proposed is accurate enough. The Chief Minister in particular went out his way to complain that we had not made any positive suggestions as to where the savings could be made. But that, sir, is not it is not within our ambit to be able to do so. I have in front of me a reply from our advisors in one stage which said, we have data that indicates a range of area per bed space generally between 100 to 177 square metres, with some specialist hospitals sitting above the higher range, but the actual area depends on the mix of single rooms and other clinical accommodation matched to the demand and capacity modelling. It is the latter that is key to ability to determining whether size and scale of hospital is appropriate. Without that and a schedule of accommodation to match a high level area of expectation, any explanation could be wildly inaccurate. And that, sir, is the key to the panel's First Amendment. We are not, and our advisors are not being provided with the relevant information to enable them to determine whether the proposed expenditure is indeed appropriate. They have based their figures on a range of other hospitals and could see that within the range, admittedly at the higher range, the costs for a building of this size is not inappropriate. What they do query is whether the actual size is appropriate for Jersey. And I note there, sir, that we have, during the course of this consideration from the beginning, amended our title to the hospital from being a world class to a first class, and then one to fit for Jersey. I'm not sure whether the language in the early reports has similarly come down to, or shall I say, sir, I'm not sure whether the actual facts as far as expenditure is concerned have come down to match the reduction in the hyperbole. And the other aspect, sir, is the level of borrowing. I appreciate that the director of the project has gone out of his way to emphasise that he appreciates himself that it is an enormous cost and that it is a rightful concern to members of the public. And in his interview reported in the JEP only at the weekend, he went on to explain his own position. And in respect of his personal property, it was a major decision for him to buy his own property, and he worried about it. But X years later, the rise in the house prices has justified his decision. And I'm very pleased for him. Of course, there is an alternative viewpoint. So if I may put my own position, in the, I think it was the 1990s, when I purchased my own property, I did so in what was then a recognised way with the assistance of an endowment mortgage. And for those not familiar with this scheme, it is one where the transaction is effectively in two parts. On the one hand, you borrow the sum from the bank and agree to pay interest on that sum on a regular basis. As far as capital repayment is concerned, that is secured by a life assurance with profits policy, where your life is assured for the amount you borrow and for the fixed term of the mortgage, and on the basis and in anticipation that after a period of 20 years or wherever it is, the value of that fund will be not only sufficient to discharge the capital sum, but give you some element of change to help you in your retirement. Chance will be a fine thing, I might say, sir. So in my own case, sir, the deficit at the end of the period or towards the end of the period amounted to 1/3 of the total borrowing and left me with what shall I say is a challenge. And I raise that point, so not to highlight my personal circumstances, but to suggest that the method of funding we have here is in a way equivalent to an endowment mortgage. We are borrowing against the perceived and hoped for increase in value of the fund. And yes, if all goes well, it will be sufficient to discharge. But if it does not, we have a problem. And more to the point, our children and grandchildren will have a problem. And it is that which I sought to highlight. Various members have asked what will be the position in the event of growth in our funds not being on the lines to date. And quite properly, in one sense, the Treasury Minister replied to the effect that she had no reason to believe that it won't continue. And in that sense, we congratulate the Investment Department on their performance to date. But there is no guarantee that can continue. In the time of my own situation, sir, no one had foreseen the economic crash of 2008. There are uncertainties out there, and there is no way we can guarantee. And it is for that reason that I believe that it is appropriate and judicious to restrict the borrowing. In some ways, sir, I compare our situation as that of a trustee. I say so, and perhaps because I'm biased here, I was in legal practice for many years and acted in that capacity in many instances. And I simply question whether, because the Assembly is in fact a trustee of the trust assets, is it a judicious decision trustees should make? And could they leave themselves open to a claim by beneficiaries should things go wrong? And I suggest, sir, that we could. And it is for that reason that I think it is judicious to restrict the amount of borrowing. And again, sir, I return to the basic point that we make the amendment not with a view to breaking the main proposal, and I do resent any suggestion to that effect. We have the interests of the public and the future public in our children and grandchildren at basically at heart. And it is for that reason and that reason only that we make the amendment. And I do also suggest, sir, that, or I do question whether accepting this amendment does in fact delay the project to the extent that it is suggested. Modifications could surely be made. I note that several £1 million has been spent on the design stage. It's not as if we are having to start from scratch, and I do not seriously believe that accepting this amendment does delay this by 18 months or 2 years to the extent suggested. So, sir, I do urge members to support our amendment. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy St. Peter.
Thank you very much, sir. I think the tenet of this debate is actually about whether or not we have a hospital in early 2027. Where we are all in agreement is we need this hospital in 2026, 2027. Now, I could understand this amendment if the cap set by the scrutiny panel was set at £693.2 million. And I'm being specific, 693. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Now, that is calculated at 804.5 less the £111.2 million worth of contingencies. You will note I haven't included inflation in that because we know what's going on in the world at the moment. We're seeing escalating prices, and it would be irresponsible not to include inflation as a figure. And you'll note I haven't included client contingency in that, sorry, contractor contingency in that, because a contractor would not wish to take a risk without having some form of contingency to work with that risk. They would not enter into the final contract. That I have had confirmed. So I could support it if it was that case. I could support it if the Assembly was asked then to come back. Or sorry, I could consider it if the Assembly was asked then to come back and approve any of those contingencies. But we have got a fine process between the Political Oversight Group and Treasury to ensure we do not make any unnecessary spend. So let me briefly address digital. The reality is digital is an HCS project, and what the OH team are doing is ensure the infrastructure is there to give full flexibility to deliver the constantly evolving digital health provision of the future. In tech terms, that's called feeds and speeds. The vision is to enable international care on island. This means the real subject matter experts do not physically need to be on island, but can do detailed diagnostics remotely. As healthcare becomes more detailed and specialized, this enables us to have a huge global pool of experts at our disposal. In Jersey, we are fortunate to work a model of 1 nurse per 6 patients. For comparison, the UK is 1 in 8 to 1 in 10. This ratio will be maintained. Now, I believe Senator Moore mentioned in her opening speech that she didn't review the review from Mott MacDonald. I can say that in 1.7 of the OBC, it states quite clearly that Mott MacDonald were considered, and I've had an email confirmation them say we confirm our appointment under your instructions to review and provide assurance commentary on the draft OHB OBC by Ernst & Young over the period of May to August this year. Mott MacDonald clearly did review our OBC. So we have an opportunity to secure finance at an all-time low level. Let us remind ourselves that our fellow Crown dependency, Isle of Man, secured 400 million at 1.625 just 2 weeks ago. We really must appreciate what a bargain that is and will not continue forever. Jersey, as we know, is not in control of its interest rates, so we must look to the UK for our indicators. It is clear the sooner we're allowed to go to the markets, the more likely we are to secure something similar. And I ask you again to go to page 39 on the OBC to indicate what the financial implications and benefits of that are. And it's really important to realise that there'll be fixed price for the entire term, fixed for 40 years, no inflationary costs at all, fixed for 40 years. It is also important to realise we can repay early with minimal or indeed no consequences. So what does that mean? It is institutional pension funds who use such financial instruments to provision their pension commitments many, many years in advance. Now, as we all accept, it's highly likely interest rates will rise. if they rise, the pension funds will be keen to exit the bond with us and place their money elsewhere at a higher return. The decision to trigger this repayment is ours. This gives us fantastic flexibility and control. Now, the benefit is to borrow 756 million cheaply and subject to discussions, obviously, with the bond issuer, payback without that penalty. The OHPOG and indeed Treasury, as supported by Senator Gorst in his speech, will keep a keen and prudent eye on expenditure so we could return unspent contingencies or surplus investment returns. Now, what I find concerning is that scrutiny's advisors are happy with this funding strategy, so why should we ignore it? Now, it appears to some that 804.5 million is a big number. It is. But look at how much we will pay for healthcare over the next 40 years. If we assume 250 million per year today, or 230 million that Senator Farnham mentioned, times 40 years with 2.6 inflation, that is just over 16 billion pounds. 16 billion pounds over the 40 years we will spend on delivering healthcare to this island. Now, that is a chunky number. Now, the spend on the hospital, you can do your own maths, is therefore really relatively very small. That's what we're debating. And what can be more important than the health of our island for generations to come? To have a facility for those 16 billion pounds to be spent in effectively. Now, let's look at the practicality of what will happen. The project team will have to start the clinical consultation again. And the reason they have to do that is it's square pegs and round holes. As I have mentioned, the figure I said before, the 690, will be acceptable because the project could continue as it is. But as that has been reduced, they're going to have to go back and start all the clinical consultation. Now, I am sure the working, dedicated consultants and nurses are really looking forward to this, especially when they got to a point of actually getting excited again about the likelihood of a new hospital. Now, we've heard it will take another 18 months to 2 years consulting to reverse engineer, and the implications of reverse engineer, in my experience, is not good, to reverse engineer all the clinical requirements into a lower fixed budget. That's what we're asking. Decisions of what not to include will have to take place. Decisions of what clinical service will or not be able to be delivered. Decisions of what compromises will have to be made. At the same time, the negotiations with our design and build partner will have to recommence. And if they are still willing, indeed, we may be forced to have to go back out to tender. Let us not forget that we were not undated in the first instance with potential partners. They weren't queuing around the block to do business with us. Let us not forget that the UK are planning on building 40 hospitals in the next 10 years. Now, these are rich pickings for the few global construction companies who have the skills and experiences in delivering hospitals to which we aspire. Now, given the uncertainty of working with Jersey, will any potential constructor want to invest the huge sums of money in submitting such tenders? Now, what makes this even worse in my mind is that the scrutiny advisors say we're paying an acceptable amount for the scale of hospital we have planned, yet we want to disrupt this process. I want to now highlight the point that is of greatest concern to me. It appears that approximately half of us are convinced that accepting this amendment will not cause any delay. Well, how do you know? As I see, all I see are nodding heads of disbelief when this reality is mentioned in speeches. You're stationary now. Double check this. No one, and I mean no one from scrutiny, has spoken to our design and build partner to confirm that they are still able and willing to deliver by the end of 2026. To me, this is shocking. We have been told as an assembly that it won't make any difference to the timescales, yet no research and evidence gathered has been done with a partner who we will work with to deliver. The fact that they are a partner with their own objectives and not a subordinate appears to be passing us by. I can't believe this assumption and disrespect. We are so close. We have a project that both government and scrutiny agree is correctly priced, with a funding model which both sides agree is appropriate. Yet it appears this amendment wants to put financial caps on what can be built. If I were one of the hundreds of clinicians who invested hours and hours into informing this clinically led design, if I were one of the many teams of experts who have listened and designed a superb offering, I would think this amendment is a vote of no confidence in their expertise and professionalism. This, let me remind you all, is the same expertise and professionalism medically that we rely on to fix us when we are ill. Regrettably, scrutiny, I don't believe, in my view, haven't given us the consequences of their amendment. So I'll leave you all with a realistic picture. Add 10 years to all of your ages and imagine you are visiting relatives and loved ones in Plymouth or Corbier wards, or entering an unchanged A&E with small children. So let there be no doubt, this will be the result of supporting this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Wickenden.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. I've been here in the Assembly for many more years than some other people that are supporting this amendment now. So I've been here to see how the hospital debate has gone on over the last 7 or so years, from the Gloucester Street proposals that we had last time that had changed from the dual site at Overdale and Gloucester Street. And the Gloucester Street we thought we had going, but one of the biggest concerns from the public and scrutiny on that proposal was that we hadn't done enough work speaking to the clinicians and the staff at the hospital. And that was a real negative for the proposals that were put through, sir. So I fully agree with how we started this time round, saying it's not acceptable, sir, to go ahead with proposals without talking to the very people that use our current hospital and that will be using and working day to day in the new. So this time round, the whole approach has been led by the professionals that use our current hospital, the professionals that will be using whatever new guidance of hospital we end up with. So I was a bit shocked when I was looking through last night and realised that the scrutiny panel had not gone and done the same approach. They have not gone and spoken to the clinicians and to come up with their idea of what they wanted to go. And I thought if we had started, and it was very clear very early on, sir, that let me turn my speakers down in case that's me, sir. It was very clear from the very beginning of the review of the hospital that we were going to do a clinician-led approach. That was said very early on, sir. So why hasn't scrutiny, who claiming to be evidence-based, gone and spoken to the very people that the whole process started with? It shows a little bit of disrespect to our health professionals, in my opinion, sir, to go forward with this approach of we'll take the outlining business case and we'll look at it from this other point of view, but ignore the very people that started the whole process to find out why they have put their point of view across and why the whole hospital has been designed around their views and their rationale for why it should be the way it is, sir. As Deputy of St Peter's just said then, these are the very professionals that if your children are sick and you take them to the hospital, you expect to trust their views and their medical expertise and the like. So why are we now not trusting them for how our hospital should be put together, how different wards should be next to each other and the same? It beggars belief, sir, that would be the way that some members of this assembly are going forward. I keep hearing, I've heard again this morning, shockingly, many members that want to support this this amendment saying, well, I don't think that it will cause a delay, sir. No evidence. to say that it will cause delay. And as the Deputy of St Peter said, nobody has gone and spoken to the people that are looking to build this to say, would this lack of money cause a problem or a delay? And if it did, where would that delay be? Would it be at the beginning or would it be at the end? So I don't think it will snow at Christmas. I've got no evidence to back that up, but to say I don't think it will cause a delay, let's just take a load of money off without doing that, is irresponsible. It's ill-advised, and it shows a complete disdain. This, well, let's use Senator Messick's word. There seems to be a very straw man argument to we want a hospital, sir. We want it as soon as we possibly can, sir, and we want it at Overdale, sir. We just don't want to pay this much for it, sir. Why? Because we don't think you need the money, or we don't want to put out Ireland in debt. It doesn't hold muster, sir. I'm absolutely shocked by this amendment. I'm shocked by the disregard it's given to our health professionals. I'm shocked at the disregard it's given to this island, and I'm shocked at the disregard it gives to this assembly, sir. I absolutely will not be supporting this amendment, and I'm shocked at anyone that does, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Wicken. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member.
Yes, please, sir. Yes, please. Sorry, sir.
Yes, that's
I've
very
had,
right.
I've had a bit of a job with my computer.
Very well. Well, I will note you as wishing to speak. Yes, Connie Tarbison Saviour.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'm afraid Deputy Wickens is going to be very upset with me because I am voting for this amendment. I have been in the state since 2011, and I have been to more meetings about a new hospital than I've had parish assemblies. Anne Pike was one of the ladies in charge when I first joined, and she had a very good plan, but then that was shot down. Then we had Senator Green, and that was shot down. And we are where we are today, and I just find it very, very disappointing. I, like a lot of members, have had many emails, phone calls and messages asking me to please vote for scrutiny's idea because they are panicking about the large sums of money. You can't even visualize the noughts. And when I was listening to Senator Gorse yesterday, I got the impression that although he was going to vote for the large row of noughts, he was a little bit concerned about what was going to happen next. And I just find that such a shame. And as for all this blackmailing that was going to cost us this and it's going to cost us that, if we don't vote for it, no, I will not be blackmailed. I'm sorry. I'm too old to be blackmailed, and I'm too old to have the wool pulled over my eyes. I just find this extremely disappointing. And yes, the price will go up. And shall I tell you why it will go up? Because some bright spark in the committee has decided to close Simon's sandpit. So everything in all our building things have to come now from the UK. Mr. Simon employed a lot of people who would pay tax, insurance, and spend their money in Jersey shops. No, we're sending all this money again to the UK where they don't even pay tax half the time. This scrutiny have done their homework. They've done such and such a lot. And I do think that we need to give them the benefit and keep going with them. I will not be voting for all these noughts to be added on to a figure in front, because I do not believe in it. So please, if you value your island and the people who live in it, please, let's just go with scrutiny, who have done their homework and have come up with some figures. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Onitab. The next to speak is the Senator Pallett.
Thank you, sir. Like Councillor Wilson-Saviours, I'm afraid Deputy Rickerton is going to be shocked with my approach to this as well. But then again, I don't think he'll be surprised. I just want to start by saying that I was reminded yesterday by the Chief Minister of the approach that my party, Progress Party, want to take moving forward. So I don't think it's any surprise the approach I'll be taking within the speech this morning. But I don't want to venture too far away from the central core of this, which is around borrowing. But there are some other elements of this that I think do need some comment. During this debate, 2026 has been used, or the date of 2026 has been used quite often around a point where we need to, in some way, shape or form, vacate the General Hospital and move into a new hospital. Let's be clear, both myself and my colleagues, party colleagues, and I think more generally, I think the Assembly as a whole need and understand the need for new hospital facilities. I don't think there's any question about that. But in the intervening period, and it's not a particularly short intervening period, it's 5 years, possibly more, because we don't, as much as we say things will be delivered on time, we can never guarantee that. We have to carry on using the current General Hospital. I know from my time within the department that with the development of a risk register, it became clear that there are a number of issues within the General Hospital that will need to be looked at and, if necessary, dealt with over that intervening period. We can't let the current hospital decay to a point where it can't be used. If there are issues with the current hospital that need to be rectified, and there are, then to ensure that we can deliver the level of healthcare that islanders expect, we're going to have to fix them. So we're going to have to invest in the General Hospital, whether we like it or not. And that is going to cost tens of millions of pounds, whether we like it or not. And our view and the view of my colleagues has been that if we're going to reinvest in the General Hospital, it would be better, or certainly an alternative, to look at the General Hospital as a site for a new facility, as we were back in 2017 and 2018. That's a party policy, and that's something that we will stick by. But getting back to the point of looking after the current hospital, we are going to have to invest in it, and that includes our mental health facilities, which, again, I listened to Deputy Poynton's speech yesterday, and there's much I agree with him about. But in terms of providing facilities for mental health, much needed improved facilities for mental health, because we know Orchard House, as much as it has been improved over the last 18 months to at least provide a better environment for care, it is not fit for purpose. Hence, the redevelopment of a new site at Cluny Pennell, which will provide new improved facilities. Now, they might not be state-of-the-art, world-class facilities, but they will be an improvement on what we've got. And they will be needed to get us through any intervening period before we get to the point where there is parity of esteem between mental health services and physical health services potentially on one side. So I just want to make the point that we are going to have to invest in these services, whether we like it or not. And in terms of from a Progress Party point of view, we were very determined to try to see that investment used wisely over the next 4 or 5 years, rather than it being literally flushed down the toilet. There was much made yesterday, I think, around the design and where we're heading in regards to Overdale. And if we are going to make a statement about health services in the island, rather than making a statement about what a new hospital is going to look like and how fantastic it's going to be, and the incredible design it's going to be, the statement I would much prefer to see us making is a commitment to have a first-class service, rather than going on about this world-class, first-class facility that's going to be built on a hill above St Helier. It'll be a monolith to design, no doubt, overlooking our capital. For me, it's always been around the service and trying to ensure that the service we provide is the best possible for islanders. And now, whether that's done in an extremely good hospital or a first-class hospital, a world-class hospital, is irrelevant to me, and I think is irrelevant to most islanders. What they want is to be able to see a doctor when they want to see him. If they've got an issue, go to the hospital and get it dealt with within a reasonable time frame, and provided a service that they can be proud of and we can all be proud of. So I think that there's a need here to bring this back to what our principles are, what our visions are, and what we really want for islanders. And it isn't about providing a hospital that, one, is unnecessary in terms of design, and two, is unnecessary in terms of cost. There's been a little bit of, over the last couple of days, unfortunately, fear factor thrown in. I hate the phrase gun to the head, but I'm afraid that's what it's felt like at times. That if we don't agree this today, then there will be delays. And Deputy Wickenden was one amongst many people that said, well, there's no evidence for that there'll be that there won't be delays. Well, then there's no evidence that there will be delays, because at the moment we are not at the stage where planning application has been put together and put into planning. Now, we don't know how long that process is going to take, and that's if the process runs smoothly. So in terms of delay, we don't know where those delays are going to be, and the more important thing for me is to get it right. Now, I know that I and some of my colleagues fundamentally disagree with this government, but that's politics, and they should be respectful of the fact that other people have got different views and potentially see other directions in which to travel. But what I want to be clear is that this is not about delays. This is about getting it right. This is about borrowing, and I'm going to come on to borrowing now. It really worries me, the direction that we're going in terms of the level of borrowing. I actually, like many people have said, I've got no issue about borrowing, government borrowing, if it's the right level of borrowing and it's for the right purpose. I think borrowing for a hospital is a reasonable purpose. I have no doubt about that. But what does worry me is the level of borrowing. What we could end up with at the end of this political term is unprecedented borrowing that not only, I think, is going to have an effect on the ability of future governments to be able to plan and be flexible in terms of what they want to deliver, but I think will undoubtedly have an impact on islanders moving forward. My children, my grandchildren. There's been a lot of talk about we want a hospital for our grandchildren and our grandchildren, but I don't want overburden with having to pay for that. I think it's important that that how we do pay for that, this hospital, is a reasonable blend. I don't believe what is on the table within the proposition is reasonable, and I fully support Senator Moore and her colleagues in bring forward what I think is a reasonable proposal to limit the spending to what should be the overall cost. I'm not going to go into the detail of pounds, shillings, and pence. Other colleagues, other members have done that quite eloquently, I think, and detailed how the funding could and should work. So I'm not going to repeat that. But I want to be clear, and I think of the words of Senator Gorse when I'm going to say it. Senator Gorse was quite clear that in his view, this borrowing was the right borrowing, but he won't agree with government borrowing. Well, I hope he keeps his word, because Otherwise, we're going to end up with £1.5–2 billion of borrowing. And I'm sorry, I haven't spoken to a single person outside the Assembly that thinks that level of borrowing is acceptable. So I hope he does stick to his word on that. But unlike him, I can't support £756 million worth of borrowing for hospital. And I actually think the approach taken by the panel is the right approach. It's a blended approach. It limits our long-term borrowing and long-term repayments. And that's something I think that the vast majority of people that I've spoken to, the average man on the street, business people, think is a prudent approach. I've spoken to many business people that think the borrowing that's been put forward by government is far in excess of what it should be. And that not only is concerning to them, it's concerning to me, and it's concerning to hopefully more than half of this Assembly. So I'm going to finish there because I've probably gone on a bit further a bit longer than I wanted to. But I have to say there is a despair outside of the Assembly with the public. I think comments have been made as that they think this hospital is never going to be built. It will be. I hope it's built where I prefer it to be built. But we do have to build it. We do have to have better facilities for our medical staff, and I do appreciate what they put in their letters. And I do understand. I work closely with some of them during my time as assistant minister. I know how desperate they are for new facilities, but it has to come at a reasonable cost. And I'm sorry, what's involved within the main proposition is not reasonable. And I'm going to be supporting the review panel's amendment. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. This is a very important day, a very big decision, and it's one that I've given a great deal of thought to. Members will know, of course, that since my election, I have withdrawn from the States and not taken part in any hospital debates because of my statutory responsibility to determine a planning application after a planning inquiry into this project. And what we have today is, in the absence, there is no planning application currently. We have a proposition, a substantive proposition, which is really in two parts. Parts A to D deal with the funding and the cost of the project, or the budget for the projects, and parts C and F deal with other matters. I want to speak, sir, on parts A to D, the issue of budget costs. And of course, not being party, I've similarly taken no part in the Council of Ministers discussions on hospital projects, ever. I've withdrawn. I've also, but I have listened in to briefing meetings and not answered questions. I've listened, not asked questions, listened, because I do need to understand where the project is going. So I'm not going to talk detail. I'm going to talk about some principles, sir. And of course, in a past life, members will perhaps know that I am a qualified public finance accountant, and I did have responsibility for major states capital projects in the past, back in the 90s, in the early 90s, in very different days. And of course, before we had ministerial systems. And of course, members won't be surprised to learn that the capital costs of all major projects of the states has always been a matter of very great political importance, and indeed public views. And I think it is absolutely right that the capital cost of projects are subject to scrutiny and review. And I think, having taken part in some of those, it's important that that process distinguishes between from what is hard facts, what is possible or potential, what might be, and rumour and other stories, because they have always been widely spread and I don't think we're in any different situation. But what has changed is in those days, those matters were generally resolved in a less, I think, adversarial situation. In those days, the finance committee of the day had a capital project subcommittee where all of the members had responsibility for those projects, and indeed the members, committee members, and those who had a view on it, and the officers all worked together to try and resolve, and those work. But of course, we're in different days where things are done more transparently, quite rightly. But I think it's important that the issue of concentrating on the facts it is recognised, the importance of that, and seeing through the wood for the trees, if you like. Now, I can remember one incident, for example, when there was disputes over the cost of the project. For example, we were building a school, I seem to remember. I remember saying, oh, we can build this school much cheaper than that. And lots of sites were chosen. In the end, so we actually went and we took an aircraft and went and visited it. And I remember we went to visit the school in the northeast of England and thought, well, this should be, this is a model for Jersey. I think members took about 5 minutes to realise when they saw the standard of the build, the standard of design, how it had been built down to a price. I won't go into the details of it, but that visit was highly productive, and members went ahead and it resolved the issue definitely. And that's an example of facts. And I think where we have that now, so I follow these principles, and there were many of them, and I remember. But so this is, of course, for us, the biggest project that we've ever done. It is absolutely vital to the island. And of course, I do have an experience as well, as prior to that role I've just described, I was Director of Finance of the Health Service. And I, in fact, was actually part of the role in the construction of what that block we used to call the 90s block. I think it cost us 30 million, I seem to remember. And of course, like many states buildings of the day, they have not stood the test of time. Standards, design, the specialist requirements have all absolutely dramatically improved. I mean, for example, look at Cyril, we just knocked that down, or just about to. The limes and so on, they're all part of the projects of that day. Standards have massively improved. And I think we need to recognise that I can't think of any more important building than the hospital that serves our community, and the need and the importance of the need to have the best that we can afford as a government. And of course, public expectations of health have changed. Clinical specialisms have developed. It was all generalist in those days, not now. And there's lots of requirements for different clinical space and standards and equipment and so on, all of which is very, very complex. But that kind of reflects the science in medicine, the way it's changed. And the clinicians have responded to that, but they need to be provided with the facilities to do so. And of course, Jersey's population in those days was, I think, around about 25,000 less people. So and of course, the sad thing is, and I think this does need to be said, and it's lessons for us in the future. Unfortunately, maintenance didn't take place to the standard required from the off. And there were long disputes because members sadly made budget cuts and didn't provide the maintenance budgets and so on. And we need to make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes in the past. And I'm hopeful that the plan that my expectation will be is the team will have maintenance plans in place, because we want this building to last, in my view, for at least 50 years. And so it is very good to hear in the debate so far that there is general consensus, there seems to be, first of all, on the need to hospital, and also the draft island plan adopted the previous state's decision to site it at Overdale. And at the moment, I'm not hearing, I think there are some views that would still consider that decision on the site open. Well, the opportunity there is, of course, to contribute in the debate on the draft island plan, because the draft island plan, which is going to the inquiry next month, the members have all had the communications about that, know that proposal is in the draft plan that Overdale is the site. At the moment, there are no amendments on it, but that decision will finally rest, of course, with the states in March, when they debate the island plan. Now, turning to the project itself, Obviously, I don't know the detail, but I obviously know what I hear in the public briefings. This is a complex, multifaceted project that I think does look to me, I can hear, you know, I pick up several components. It's a hospital facility and its services. It's got support facilities like sterile services that are elsewhere, cooking and so on. Those services which are, you know, have to necessarily to serve the building. It's got major off-site access infrastructure, and there's a new mental health facility, something which has desperately lagged behind everything. There was no major new health facility built in the 80s. I don't know when the last time, from Deputy Poynton's speech yesterday, Deputy St John, it sounds as if the last time a major investment in mental health was made in the Victorian days. So that's really, to me, I think, really important. And of course, there's the car park, the services, and then the education learning centre. This is not a luxury. This is not a luxury. I remember that the current General Hospital has a theatre. It's called the Halliwell Theatre. And what you read there if one reads about the occupation, you find that Dr. Halliwell was a surgeon in the General Hospital during the occupation that kept the island's facilities going. And that was named after him. And that was so well used for clinical reviews, clinical follow-up, education. But of course, things have changed. But it's great to hear that there is to be an investment in doing that. And that's so seemed to be tied up with the need to have a, you know, look after, create our own, build our own staff. And of course, the design seems to be a campus. That's what I see. I hear a campus, and they all seem to link together, i.e. they're all put together in a plan. Seems to me that those must be for reasons of efficiency and, you know, withdrawing from other sites, which for them become available for other use. And of course, all of that will involve temporary decanting during construction of current facilities, but it's an integrated plan. And of course, how did they, you know, I work with project teams, but not on this one, obviously. But I know that design processes are always iterative. One goes repeatedly at the same issues, and a process of refinement takes place and designs evolve. And it's really important, I think, that the element that I see loud and long, and we've all had letters as members from the doctors and from the nurses and the paramedics, and I'm so grateful for their letter, because what it confirmed to me is that the clinical input of the statement of what is requirement of facilities has been produced by our clinicians, and I'm absolutely delighted to hear that, because when I wrote the supplementary planning guidance, I made that a cornerstone of the guidance, that the design hospitals should be led and fed by the clinical inputs. And I did that because before I got elected, I sat in the public inquiry and took place in it. In this is the first, not the second, couldn't do that because I was the minister by then, but the first planning inquiry into the Costa Street scheme. And what I listened to was clinicians after clinicians lining up to say how they had not only not been involved, but what had been done just would not work. And the problems of working and, you know, trying to provide services in a building site of that nature just was horrendous to them. And so I heard those views being expressed. But of course, also, there wasn't a design. What we had at that stage was an approach called Rochdale envelope, which basically means that you get a plan and you draw a box around it and you size the box by its height, its breadth and its width. And you say, that's the size of the box. What we're going to put in there is so many square feet, this, that and the other, and that's it. And so that's what happened. And of course, unfortunately, it is true that that approach to project design is adopted at places in the UK, hence Rochdale envelope. The reason why Rochdale, because it was challenged in law, but it was brought here, and we know what the outcome was. And so what I think is really important is that in the approach to this design, that the team have done, and I think this is where members have to judge the facts, because I haven't been party to those processes, about wide consultation. So the building will be designed in two ways. First of all, inside out, in other words, what clinical facilities do we want? And how would they be linked together, and how should they interact internally, i.e. a functional spec. And then also an outside in, recognising that the buildings fit within environment, and you have to then factor in all of the landscaping and all of the infrastructure, all that sort of thing. And those two processes come together in a design. And I think what I see happening, again, I've not been at the table, so I don't know the details, that the work has been ongoing in this for some considerable time. And what we're seeing is iterations of design, and out of it should come, a planning application which will allow all these matters, the details, to be judged by the planning inspector when that inquiry is made, and ultimately a report will come for a decision. And so I think sorry, sir, I thought I'd heard a noise there, but I'll carry on. So what will happen? What will be the effect of this amendment passing? Obviously, at this stage of the process, what the team would have to do, the design team, if it's adopted, if members back it, would have to review all the aspects of the development. And they would need to decide, well, what parts of it to remove to stay within the targets, what parts of it would they reduce in size? I mean, those things. And then if that meant choices between different clinical facilities, which ones would go? Or maybe which ones would be deferred and done somewhere else, perhaps? And then what about, can we run the thing, for example, without the support infrastructure, like a car park? Can we do that? Or maybe we don't. Those sort of questions will arise. What about the energy centre? Well, even the hospital won't run without that. What about the infrastructure? You need that. And of course, you need to be able to get to it. And we've heard all those issues there. And my expectation is those issues will be aired very fully, I expect, at the planning inquiry. I think I'm really I'm very confident planning inspector, because the planning inspector will decide the scope of how that inquiry is run when the application comes. And I have absolutely no doubt that there will be some details, elements that the planning inspector identifies needs attention, because these are very top quality professionals. So, but of course, to allow that process of review to happen, it's inevitable. It's going to take time. I know in the past, for example, just an example, here's a bit of an example of the danger of just trying to a risk of cobbling something together quickly. It's likely to lead to wrong decisions. For remember, when the General Hospital G8, what I call General Hospital 1 application was refused, then before I got into the States, previous administration went and put together a new application very quickly, within weeks, for General Hospital 2, which then, of course, ran into problems as well. So such a process of review would take time, because it will involve, my expectation will be, major changes. So, and of course, there, ironically, for me personally, there would probably be a benefit that I would be relieved of the job of having to decide a planning application after the planning inquiry. In fact, probably wouldn't get the planning inquiry up before the end of term, I don't think, very unlikely. I don't know, I'd leave that to others. But the notion that there will not be a delay cannot simply be true. There will be, there will need to be, to do things properly, to make sure we get we don't end up with a piecemeal project in that situation. It will need to be rethought, and that needs the time. Of course, not only means, if the members vote for the amendment, it frees me in a job, and I won't have to be worried about it. Not that I worry, I respond to my duty as best I can. And but what about the existing building? We've heard from clinicians about the problems, and of course, I personally haven't had problem experiences being in the general hospital, fortunately, but I have relatives who've had experiences of within facilities that are not right, and there's clinical decisions having to be made to relieve beds, driven by the physical problems and restrictions that they have in that building to maintaining it. And so undoubtedly that delay would mean that we would need to be able to keep what is a grossly inadequate facility, sadly, going even longer. And of course, what will that do for our staff recruitment and retention? I can't imagine what the reactions would be in people who've raised expectations, and because they join the health service because they love the service, they love people. But at the end of it, I think that you can't disregard that. So there will be consequences of a delay, but it doesn't mean to say we have to be profligate in how we do things. Internal management of the funds, of the way these things work, contingencies and optimism bias and all this kind of stuff, all of that could be managed within the professional structure of the project. It's not a question of just handing it over to a developer with a blank check, not at all. These things are routinely subject to scrutiny, and I know that. And so I think, sir, I've probably gone on too long, but we need this asset. And I have to be honest, I declare an interest. I'm 75 years of age now. I want that asset to be there. I want it to be there for my children, for my grandchildren. I want us to be proud of what we do. And so I think just one other mention I'll briefly mention. Men will be surprised that they know that, if you like, I regard myself as centre-left. Ideally, when I went and worked for the health service, I went in with an attitude that private healthcare was wrong. And I heard that view a number of times in the debate. Having worked in the health service, I believe I certainly changed my view, is that it can be managed. And if it's managed properly, and that's a hugely important thing, to make sure it does not get out of kilter between private and public sector services, so we get a greater equality, that you can get a return of money to the public cost, to the public health service, from the charges that one makes for all the facilities that one provides. So the money just does not go just in the doctor's pockets. And if you get that, and of course it's always possible, you've got, as was said earlier, you can reassign those facilities for public use in whatever you want. And of course we have got a lot of people in Jersey who have private health insurance, and at the moment those monies go outside our economic system rather than locally. So sir, I apologise for speaking at length, but I've tried to speak about principles because I'm not on the project. I don't know the details. But I'm absolutely clear that a decision to vote for this amendment to parts A and D about the costs of this project would cause delays. And I don't know what the delays would do to the project team, but I do know the sort of choices that whoever picks up the pieces would have to deal with. And I know they will take time. And I think, personally, that those issues are likely to go well in the next assembly. That's my feeling for the situation, sir. And thank you. I shall not be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Sergeant.
Thank you, sir.
And I'd like to take people's minds back to the beginning of this debate yesterday, when we had an excellent speech given by the Constable of St. John, who told it as he saw it and as his electorate, his parishioners, see it. And he's laid out very clearly what he detected was the mood of people out there, our voters, and should be reflected, I believe, in our mood today. And before we start any deeper into that, I just want to remind people what we have scrutiny for. Why do we have scrutiny? We have scrutiny to examine policy brought forward by ministers and to critique it, to look for defects, look for dangers, look for, but not to devise alternatives. Scrutiny is not about coming with an alternative. All what he made, and prefer to not have a commentary as I'm speaking, please, sir.
I'm sure there's room for an element of toing and froing, but perhaps well, certainly the deputy should not be interrupted. Deputy Master, thank you.
Thank you, sir. But not to come up with alternative policy. That's not its job. And any critique from ministers, and there's been lots of it, saying, look, they haven't got the finished article, they haven't come up with the alternative, is actually irrelevant. Irrelevant. What the scrutiny panel have done is to examine the policy brought forward by the ministers and found some fault with it. Everyone knows that we are in desperate need of a new hospital. Everyone now, I think, accepts that that will be built at Overdale. What people find incredible is that it should cost quite as much as is suggested. £804 million to build a new hospital. And when we examine what goes into the 800 million pounds, we see obvious things. The main works on the main hospital, £200 million. Energy centre, £27 million. Mental health, £12.3 million. A knowledge centre, train up our workers, £9.1 million. External works, £25 million. Car park, £10 million. Highways, £19 million. Demolition, £2.6, making a total of £311 million. Add to that what is called incidentals and contingencies, what do you get? Well, certainly, if a builder comes to me and gives me an estimate for putting a building up in my backyard, I don't expect him to give a quote of £30 million plus contingencies, which amount to £50 million. And yet, that's what we've got here. The feeling that the Constable of St. John remarked about actually translates into facts. As my colleague illustrated yesterday, and I want to draw people's attention, refresh their mind over what those contingencies and incidentals amount to. So we've got £311 for the actual bill of the hospital, followed by contractor contingency, £35 million. PCSA costs, I don't know, and have a think. Do you know what these mean? PCSA costs, not clear to me, £34 million. Design and professional fees, fair enough, £33 million. Equipment, £56 million. They have to have some equipment in the hospital. Reprovision of services from Overdale, £14 million. Preliminaries, whatever they are, £53 million. Inflation, it has to be built in, £34 million. Overhead and profit, £44 million, 9.5% rate. Decant and migration, 0.6 million pounds. Optimism bias, and my colleague Deputy Ward focused on this yesterday, 38 million pounds. Government team costs, this is the government team that we already employ and pay, 39 million pounds. Client contingency, again, not explained, 73 million pounds. Land acquisition, reprovision costs, 34 million pounds. So the contingencies and the incidentals add up to more than the cost of the hospital. And people out there, and I don't believe people in here, can actually credit that. How do you have contingencies at 1.6 times the cost of the hospital? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to the scrutiny panel either, and they said so. Now, the real nub of the issue, and I remind people we seem to have drifted off it, is what do we do now? Do we give ministers permission today to go out and spend £800 million as they see fit, with no regard to what this assembly is saying? Or do we set in an interim, work towards something like £550 million? If you can't manage within that envelope, then come back to us so that we can accept that we need some more. But don't just go out. I know what happens. What happens to you when you've got a budget? And you think, yeah, I've got a budget, I'm supposed to be for this. What do? If you've got a top mark on that, you spend it. You spend up to. Up to always includes actually the target. What it's doing is saying, can you manage on this smaller figure? By all means, it's not a big brick wall. It's not a stop. It's a try and manage within this figure. And if you can't manage, come back to us with carefully worked out and sensible plans as to how we're going to get the hospital. And that's all it says. It doesn't, like minister after minister has been repeating, stop the whole process. It doesn't threaten, as the health minister almost appeared to do yesterday, doesn't threaten maternity services. It's not a question of shroud waving and frightening people about, unless we get the full sum now, and it is now on this vote, unless we get the full sum now, we'll have to throw half the things that we really want out with the backboard. That is not the case. As the planning minister has just said, an inquiry, planning inspector will take his time to assess what is proposed. And it will take time. An inquiry doesn't take place overnight, it takes place over a matter of months. So this argument that it stops everything and will cause a tremendous delay, we'll get nowhere with it, actually is not a real argument. I urge the Assembly to vote for the reasonable amendment of the scrutiny panel.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Ash.
Thank you, sir. And I'm pleased there to follow Deputy Southern. Senator Mizek said yesterday he didn't want any more straw man government arguments. Well, he's lucky on this, sir, because I'm not going to speak for the government. I'm going to do what I feel Senator Mizek and his party purport to do, and that's to speak for the decent working people of the island and the elderly and their families who cannot afford private medical care. Firstly, sir, let us get one thing straight with a phrase few probably would think I wouldn't utter in this debate, sir. Senator Moore is 100% correct. We can build a cheaper hospital. Indeed, those of you with not particularly brilliant memories, because it wasn't very long ago, will recall that we have built one, and for considerably less than the Senator's 500 million. We built, sir, the Nightingale Hospital. Yes, it was probably really a glorified tent, which wouldn't have lasted 10 years, let alone 50. It had no maternity facility, no cancer facility, no A&E facility, no mental health facility. I could go on, sir, but in short, it was a fairly limited facility that we didn't really have to use, and that thank goodness for that. But it was a hospital. You see, sir, there are hospitals and there are hospitals. Can we have a cheaper one? Yes. Will it be as good as the one proposed? No, it will not. So the question I would ask the Assembly is, should we offer the population a first-class offering or a second-class one? We hear a lot, sir, or have in the debate about the splendid hospital staff, and they do a fantastic job in very difficult circumstances. And we hear it's all about the staff. If we pay the staff more, healthcare will be fantastic. It doesn't quite work like that. Do you feel that if we don't provide people with the finest facilities to work with, they can perform, unless they can work miracles, they cannot perform to the extent they can perform surrounded with quality equipment? If Manchester City Football Club, sir, took to the field wearing deep sea divers boots, they would not win the Premier League. They wouldn't even win against the Jersey Bulls. So what should we change, sir, in order to cut the cost? Because that's what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to cut the cost. Should we perhaps offer less on island treatment? People could go away, they do now, perhaps more people can go away. Should we cut the number of operating theatres and treatment rooms, which would probably then extend waiting lists rather than shorten them, as we are currently aiming to do? Should we just have wards, sir, rather than en-suite facilities, providing privacy and dignity? And I think when we're on the subject of privacy and dignity, sir, currently many people say goodbye to people in the hospital with a screen pulled round the bed, in full hearing of others within that facility. I spoke to someone the other day who said he was traumatized by lying in a bed and hearing someone die for the first time in his life. It's not a great situation, sir. In the hospital we have planned with 75% en-suite facilities, that will not occur. Actually, sir, while I'm on the subject of single occupancy, it was said yesterday this will mean more staffing. That is not necessarily, of course, the case, sir, because with digital monitoring, it negates a considerable need for staffing in single occupancy rooms. And I don't think I need to remind the Assembly that we have some of the fastest speeds in the world and some of the best connectivity. And it's about time we used it. Also, sir, according to the chief nurse, who is the accountable officer, we have no nursing crisis. We have a patient-nurse ratio of 1 to 6, compared to the NHS, which fluctuates between 1 to 8 and 1 to 10. Still, never let the facts get in the way of a good rumour, eh, sir? Should we have a fit for purpose maternity and children's unit or not? Well, actually, we know from Deputy Dublé yesterday we definitely should. Should we have a dedicated mental health facility on site or not? Well, actually, sir, we know from Deputy Pamplin on numerous speeches in the Assembly that we most definitely should. And this is the problem, isn't it? Everyone wants money saved, but not on their manor. A similar problem exists within our housing situation as well. So we need more housing, whoa, but not there. Don't build it there. Should we offer our health workers a fantastic working environment or not? We should know that from Reform, sir, that they definitely do. But they seem slightly undecided on whether or not because of the cost, sir. Do we wish to have a basic offering or an excellent one? Do we want a 21st century ensuite offering, or perhaps a 19th century ward offering? By ward offering, sir, I mean hospital ward. I don't mean ward. Impressive structure that he is, I'm not sure he'd make a really good hospital. And on reflection, he might be refused on height grounds by planning anyway. Are we, sorry, are we really suggesting we don't want a top quality health offering for all islanders? Do we really want a two-tier health structure? I don't know whether members would have watched it, sir, because it's some time ago, but there was a very good anti-war film, a musical called Oh, What a Lovely War. And there was a scene in that I think showed attitudes at the time, and I hope and trust we've moved away from it, but at times maybe we haven't. And it's a scene when the first British wounded are coming back from the First World War, and a sergeant goes up and he says, "The ambulances are ready, sir. Officers only." And the officer says, "Excellent, Sergeant. What about the other ranks?" And he said, "Oh, some lorry drivers have offered to take them to Millbank Hospital in their dinner hour." Fairly unfair. Maybe that's what we should do, though. So maybe we should consider adopting a US style offering. If you're familiar with the American health system, sir, it's a fairly excellent one if you have the money to pay for it, and it's a pretty awful one if you don't. But it would save us money. Perhaps we should head down that route. I personally don't fancy heading down that route, but if people want to have a two, could we do it? Could we extend it to schools, sir? Let's have a look at schools. Should we bother teaching all three sciences? Biology, physics, chemistry? Could we just combine them into one sort of general science lesson? Could we do away with PE, sir? It's a big area, isn't it? A gym. It's not used a lot of the time. Could we do away with that? I don't think we'd dream of doing away with that. Will we maybe not teach foreign languages? That would be a bit of a saving. We would not dream of doing that. Why are we talking about doing it in a hospital? So we talk endlessly about, well, we talk endlessly full stop, but we talk endlessly about income inequality in this assembly. Few areas is it more apparent than in health. We nod earnestly when people talk about affordable housing, with people talking about the minimum wage, even though very, very few are on the minimum wage in Jersey. And indeed, the free buses that we heard mentioned yesterday. In short, sir, it's lip service. It plays to the gallery. It makes a nice article for the JEP to write about. And it gives those a more left-leaning bias, if you like, sir, in the Assembly, a stick to beat the government. However, when it comes to take a massive leap towards equality that we now have in front of us, we seem to have people who are satisfied to offer a substandard offering to islanders who don't enjoy the luxury of private health insurance. Personally, sir, I find that a disgrace. Someone actually described me as a socialist for holding such views. I am not a socialist, sir, but I do believe that all islanders are entitled to excellent healthcare as a matter of right. So we've had much talk of delay, and I think Senator spoke well on this. He was honest, sir. He spoke that he didn't want to spend this money because he still wanted the facility at Gloucester Street. That's fine. That's an honesty, sir. But to say that this will not cause delay is, of course, absolute nonsense, sir. It's absolutely mad. If you take 200 million out of a project, we will need to redesign. We will work out what can be provided, what can't be provided. We will have to go pretty much literally back to the drawing board. We will have to talk to doctors as to whether they can do away with certain things within the hospital. We'll have to decide whether certain rest areas will not be necessary, whether communal areas will not be necessary. Well, take for example, And we had a debate of censure, didn't we? Because it took so long for the report to come back on South Hill. South Hill's a block of flats, but it still had to be worked on by SOJDC as to the implications of putting affordable housing within that. That took, I think, 3 months, maybe 3 months too long. But if you think it took that long to work out a simple block of flats, you imagine how long it's going to take to redesign a hospital. I can tell you that 18 months that is being suggested could well be a very, very generous estimation. Finally, sir, I'll move on to the funding. I've rarely heard such nonsense. We're in a position to borrow at some of the most competitive rates ever seen. Yet we have people suggesting that we use our carefully built up reserves that are yielding an average of 6%. Now, I'm not arrogant enough to predict credit agencies, sir. I don't profess to know the capital markets inside out, as many of the Assembly appear to. But I did work as a bond broker. I worked in the FTSE market, the US bond futures market, and the foreign exchange market. And I do know that you don't have to have done any of that to realize that a fixed rate loan over 30 or 40 years gives you security over your project costs. Many I have explained the financing to, sir, have not realized that we can fix a rate for 30 or 40 years, and perhaps that has been a fault of our communications. But you can. They are genuinely surprised that we can get around 2% fixed for 30 or 40 years. One lady I explained this to, sir, said to me, then why on earth would you use your reserves? The answer, sir, of course, is you wouldn't. Thank you.
Very much, Tim. Conor Harbison Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I open my speech today by saying categorically that I support the construction of a hospital at Overdale and concur with the several arguments put forward yesterday and today by others. I'm not a medical expert and defer to professional advice. I do note, however, that the proposed hospital has swollen, if I can use a medical term, into a campus and with associated enlarged costs. I am familiar to a degree, so with the problems of large developments in the island, having been responsible together with Deputy Lewis for the construction of our energy from waste plant at La Colette. It was in 2008 and to 10, the largest project ever undertaken in the island, and was paid for out of reserves. I was, as Minister at the time, kept regularly up to speed with that project and even survived a rescindment motion brought by the former Deputy of St Mary, who some may remember took some 3 hours to make his presentation. I shall not be speaking for 3 hours, sir. There was a problem with finances stimulated by a failure by the Treasury to hedge the exchange rates at the time. And this cost a significant sum over the budgeted cost. So I would take this opportunity to ask the project team not to repeat that error. Well, circumstances at the time so dictated a devaluation in the pound, resulting in massive changes in currency exchange rates. And I mentioned this to emphasize the point that we have no control over world events and the effect they may have on our island. I do appreciate the effects there on staff in the workplace environment and the desperate shortage faced at present, necessitating cancellations, and I hear today that theatre operations are cancelled due to staff shortages. There is, of course, absolutely no certainty that a new hospital will cure staff shortages, and my suggestion would be perhaps that we should spend less on this project and pay them better. We in this Assembly make decisions based on the best and the latest information, and importantly, need to have confidence in that information in order to make those decisions. My difficulty, sir, is that the outlined business case doesn't instill confidence in me. That has been catalysed by what could be described as obfuscation when detail has been requested, either because the detail of the request was unknown or simply through unwillingness or lack of understanding. Requests over the costs of facility management have been met with a response that we're working on it, but we hope it'll be less than at present because we'll have a new building. That simply isn't good enough. It leads one to surmise there are hidden agendas to outsource existing services. I can only say that in other government departments, this has proven to be an abject failure. We need to be aware of the whole life costs of this project to enable us to be absolutely certain that we aren't being landed with a legacy of debt. Jersey has in the past stood out as an exemplar in its financial management. Why prejudice that, sir? Let us be prudent. I say to the Policy Oversight Group, be more commercial, stop shroud waving, get a grip of the project and get on with it. But remember who's paying for it, the taxpayer of Jersey. There are missing elements in this project, particularly with regard to...
Sorry, someone spoke over the system. Could people ensure, please, that their microphones are turned off? Please continue, Conrad.
Thanks, sir. My lack of confidence surfaces once again in regard to the private wing or floor as suggested. I'm not against the principle, and we are told it could bring in £10 million per annum. The simple question in my mind is whether that is gross or net. We simply don't know. So how can we possibly be expected to make a decision on that basis? It is suggested that further compulsory land purchases may be necessary. I suspect there will be pockets of land that have been picked up by speculators. We mustn't be held to ransom, and we need to move on with or without these properties in mind. We do need to know details, and I would suggest to members who are saying that we should just get on with it at the proposed £804 million figure put forward, that they are abrogating their responsibilities as states members by making a decision without knowing the full detail. The eye-watering magnitude of the sums involved dictate that the scrutiny of this project is more important than ever. Do not criticise scrutiny for doing its job. Some members may not like it, and that has been made very clear. This leads me to comment on a remark earlier in the debate from Deputy Martin, who suggested that it was only a vociferous few and some anoraks that disagreed with the concept of the massive expenditure and borrowing to match. I can assure the Deputy, sir, that scrutiny have reached out as much as possible and noted closely the government JE submissions. Many of these anoraks, in her words, are experienced business people, GPs who have their own opinions and are very much in touch with the reality of day-to-day work, and hospital staff, some of whom do not share her views. She indicated the silent majority wanted to carry on regardless of cost. I've no idea where she got that from, sir, but I would contend that the silent majority are angry with the approach this government are taking to borrowing and the lack of control over spending. Control of spending, or more accurately, how spending will be controlled in this project, is deeply concerning and gives rise to the proposed cap of 550 million in this amendment. There is no evidence of how spending will be managed. It became evident that putting a cap on the project would at this stage enable the project to move on, but force the project team to come back to the Assembly should it be found that there is a need for increased funding. There is such a large proportion of the £804 million proposal directed to what the Health Minister described earlier as boring stuff, that pencils need to be sharpened, and these costs properly analysed for all to see. The perception at present is that contingencies, optimism bias, contractors' profit and overhead, and inflation figures will be a slush fund or treasure trove for all involved to dip into. I would qualify that, sir, by saying that I would be the last to cast aspersions towards the integrity of anyone involved in the project, but it is far from clear and does them no favours. I did ask at a recent meeting with the Policy Oversight Group who was actually politically responsible for spending on the project. We so were advised that it was the Treasury Minister. However, given that she was unable to be present at that meeting, she may not yet be aware of that, but I'm sure is well equipped to discuss that further with the Deputy Chief Minister should she wish. This does raise the point of a need for proper controls which are not evidenced and have stimulated this amendment. We're told so that Her Majesty's Treasury Green Book best practice is used and that industry best practice has been incorporated in the cost proposal. But in answer to that, sir, I would suggest that in the Mike Jackson Green Book of Best Practice, it's not best practice to spend £804 million when you don't have it and without detailed cost. It's not best practice to borrow £750 million and saddle our children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren with debt for the next 40 years without any apparent semblance of robust spending controls. Senator Gorser, for whom I have the greatest respect, suggested that enhanced controls and careful management by the Treasury would be necessary, but we have absolutely no evidence as to how that will be put in place. Moving, sir, to the thrust of the amendment, in particular costs, it comes down, in my view, to competence. There has been so much disparity in figures, in proposed floor areas, in the cost of the mental health unit, in the numbers of islands with private health insurance, that we can't have any certainty that what we've been told is correct. I cannot understand why there could not be clarity on this. Is it that the ministers have been wrongly advised or have misconstrued advice given? Who knows? I feel that placing the cap as proposed on the project at this stage with a distinct object of giving the team a free hand to move on with it was a preferred solution as opposed to the reference back recommended by advisors. Let the policy oversight team come back to the States Assembly, the sovereign body. I would remind civil servants and UK imported experts that the States Assembly is not a rubber stamping body to request funds in the event that they fail to keep the project under financial control. But we are not an unreasonable body, sir. We want this hospital built. It appears to me, sir, that the Deputy Chief Minister, nice chap that he is simply not in control of the project. And I would remind members that civil servants, with all due respect, are there to serve the minister. This understanding seems to have disappeared. I ask, sir, who is the responsible director for this project? And what experience do they have in projects of this size? We honestly don't know. Does the minister know? The lack of a clear management structure serves only to undermine, once again, my confidence in the project as presented. I conclude, so, by emphasising that this amendment is not brought for political gain. It is not brought, as suggested by some, as a wrecking motion. It is brought as a result of a clear message from islanders who see the proposed budget figure excessive and the level of borrowing as being insane. I urge members to support the amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Truscott.
Thank you, sir. And it's not every day that a member or the Assembly will be faced of at a vote as large and as such magnitude as the one that's facing us. It is, as I think the Chief Minister said, once in a generation, the Assembly will be asked to make such a decision. And I've been listening, and I've come with an open mind to this debate, and it is without shadow, sir, an eye-watering amount of money that we're faced with. But what is being offered up at Overdale, in my mind, will be a first-class offering. It's been clinician-led. All of our staff had an input of what's going up there, and it will be an amalgamation of healthcare as well. And so we cannot, as we have done, just regard this as just the hospital. It's an amalgamation of services on one site. And I think that one-stop kind of shop really does appeal to me. But of course, it's going to be, in financial terms, a great deal more than just the original Gloucester Street offering. it is a given that the hospital at Gloucester Street is over. It's fast approaching its end of days, and I think we'll be lucky to get it through to, in the next 5 years, and even then we're still going to have to spend a considerable amount of money on it. £6 million going in the maternity unit there, and quite rightly too. We've agreed the site, the access road. This is the next hurdle. The spoke today is the next hurdle. The one after this will be the planning application, and that is a major hurdle. And obviously, that will be the opportunity for every islander again to have their say in a public forum, and I think that's essential and very important in this whole process. So it's I've had, regarding the planning, it's always going to be a challenge placing a hospital at the top of a hill on a headland, coming away effectively from the sea level or the basin of St Helier, where you could at least build up. Mainly the Overdale site is vertically challenged, and I think we've seen that in the way that the volume and the mass has changed from, I think, 71,000 square meters to 65, I think would be the new iteration. And I've got to say, when I first saw the architect's drawings in the JP the other day, the first ones that came along, I was astounded, shocked even, sir. Obviously, being on planning for so long, that anybody could think that would, the first iteration, that tall building with a rather unusual roof line would get through planning, because in my personal view that would have failed on skyline impact alone. The scale and mass on a skyline, it would have failed, full stop. So I'm pleased to see. I'll leave it at that, because that is a policy, and I won't elaborate any more on that. So, as I say, it's still got one large today's hurdle and the planning hurdle still to jump. So there's plenty of things still to go through. It is about funding and financing, and I've been a Jerseyman. My parents were born just before the occupation, and prudence, cautiousness with money, and all those things I've been taught. And I'm very debt adverse, and here I am contemplating an investment, and I can only, it is an investment, and I think the Constable Trinity yesterday touched on this. We're investing in our health infrastructure. It will go on the one side as an asset on the balance sheet, and what a wonderful asset will be for future generations. I have got concerns, and everybody's right. This is a 40-year term that this loan has been considered over, and without a shadow of doubt, sir, in the next 40 years there is bound to be another financial crisis of some sort or some varying magnitudes. I'm sure we've all seen the bust boom times of the 80s, 90s, and the Whitleys and all the rest. So, of course, there is a degree of worry and angst over that, and who wouldn't? But I was assured by the Treasury Minister's words yesterday, Bethany Plinell, and whereas she said that the model going forward has been fully stress tested, and I think they say, and it came out really well. I think 97% probability that the strategic reserve could withstand a significant shock and still be able to accommodate and pay the bonds. So that gave me reassurance. And there was that other graph, I think, that was produced that showed if we were to take the money out of reserve and how that would affect things. It's a significant money difference there as well. So it all points to put money into the reserves the way that has been proposed. It makes absolute sense. And of course, as Ash just pointed out, interest rates are at an historic low, and it is a good time, quite likely, to take advantage of that going forward. I was delighted to see that our clinicians and our nurses wrote to us and totally take on board the sentiment. They've all had an input of what is being proposed. They're the ones at the cold face. They're the ones having to, deal in work in very difficult circumstances. So I'm more than keen to get them up into a new facility, something that the island can be proud of. Let's face it, at one point in our life, many points in our life, we're going to need the hospital one way or the other, for sure. It's this, as you say, this is a tricky one. I've been in touch with a number of constituents and islanders of great concern about the sum. But let's face it, decades of underinvestment in our infrastructure. We've just not invested. There's been no forward thinking. We haven't got to grips with the population control, and we find ourselves where we are. I think it's time to stop procrastinating. I think we've done that for far too long. I think it's time for being positive. I think we should all unite behind Senator Farnan, and he was tasked with this difficult job of delivering the hospital going forward, and he's taking some criticism for it. But in fairness to him, he's got Steely Reserve, and I admire him for that. And I say, hopefully, at least you get it to the planning application stage. For me, that would be its next major test. But I won't be, as you probably gathered, I won't be supporting the amendment. So I will main position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. There's always a risk on going relatively late in the debate, in the sense that, especially when there's been an overnight recess, there's always the concern that government will have nobbled enough people to get a majority overnight by offering the usual inducements or whatever they may be, political inducements, I should say, and saying, oh, if you vote for this, then this. I hope that there are still members out there who can be swayed either way, and I think we need a good summing up by Senator Moore to convince some of the stragglers to put to bed once and for all the fact that there should be any delays in this. I think the vast majority of the Assembly want this hospital built on the current site. We accept that this may not have been our first choice. If it had been 10 years ago, we might have put it somewhere else, and for various reasons, including political acceptability, we're left with Overdale, which personally I don't think is too bad. I think there's nothing wrong with having a hospital on the top of a hill, a good social facility for the benefit of our community, which can be seen by everybody, and rather than necessarily a derelict sports centre, which is what we're used to having on a hill. That said, I'm not fully convinced that we need a new road for it, but I'm not going to get into that level of detail for my contribution. What I have noticed, but the benefit, of course, of going relatively late is that you can address some of the direct points that have been made. And I found it strange how many of the speeches have focused on Reform Jersey, and our 5 members and our 5 votes, no doubt, because they know that we're not an insignificant voting bloc in this Assembly when we put our minds to it. And they're saying strange arguments. They're saying that we should be supporting this because apparently we care about people. Now, that's true. We do care about people, and that is central to all of our values and the policies that we espouse, but there is a certain paucity of argument being put forward by people like Deputy Ash. I'll just use him as an example, though Deputy Martin also used the same method of argument. effectively saying you should support this because you're socialists and you like amassing unnecessary debt beyond your means and beyond our means. And we are supporting this even though we're not socialists. Now, that's a very strange argument, but first of all, it's quite insulting because it tries to pigeonhole us. But it also, with that, it also tends to then presuppose the position of other proponents of this amendment. So, for example, this isn't our amendment, of course. It's an amendment which is brought by Senator Moore and on behalf of the scrutiny panel, which has been specifically set up to look at the future hospital project. And yes, we are supporting this because we've looked and considered it very carefully. We've listened to the arguments and the various presentations that have been put forward, and we realise that what we've been presented by government doesn't stack up. But to finalise the last point I was making, so it's almost like when Deputy Ash stands up, he's saying we would expect this kind of amendment and support for Senator Pallett, Deputy Luce, Progress Jersey, Senator Ferguson, former Senator Balash, who's been very vocal, as well as some other prominent members in society who have said that we should support the amendment. But we would expect it from them because we know that they don't have the interest of the public at heart. They're all hard-nosed capitalists who like to crush on and stand on the little person. Now, I don't believe that. I think that the fact that these kind of arguments have been put forward really do the government and the Alliance Party, because let's face it, there is clearly an Alliance Party whip on this as well. They are in government. And I'll make the point now. I've been scratching my head trying to think about why on earth the government would be putting forward spending plans which don't stack up, which are far beyond the magnitude of a scale for even what an excellent hospital facility would require. And I've come to the conclusion, talking to other people as well, not in my usual circle, is that they want some kind of legacy to be left, and that they are scared that they're not going to be back in power to deliver this project, and that they're worried that if they don't get it over the line today, that actually they will have a hospital built, but it just won't be their one, and they won't be able to be in control of it. Now, I'll look at those arguments a bit more, but I think I've got good reasons for putting that, and I think they've allowed themselves to be in surround themselves by a group of self-affirming individuals, and they're suffering effectively from what's known as groupthink. Now, there were analogies made about in the past that making the tough decisions, such as the social security system that was implemented, the benefit system, pensions, etc., which the Chief Minister referred to, and Queen's Valley, the flooding of Queen's Valley, and both in which cases were vindicated by hindsight. Now, I would agree with that. I think I would have supported the social security system even in the face of some strong public pressure. And I think the same with Queen's Valley, although, of course, with Queen's Valley, it would be much better if we had had a sustainable population policy decades back, which envisaged the fact that water supply would be a problem for a growing population. But I accept that. But the problem there is that they're not valid analogies, because nobody is suggesting here that we don't have a hospital, or we don't have a hospital on Overdale, or that we don't have it as soon as possible. That's what was happening with the social security opponents, and with Queen's Valley. They're saying don't do that, we don't want it at all. What we're all saying in this assembly that I've heard today, although I accept there are some voices on the extremes in civil society who want to go back to the drawing board, and to them I would say I think you need to accept the fact that Overdale is going, that hospital is going to Overdale, and it's not going to be delayed, and we need to push on with that, because by continuing to suggest other sites like Warwick Farm and St Saviour's Hospital, you're simply muddying the waters and giving credence to those who want to support the government's plans. And I would like Senator Moore to disassociate herself from that position and give a reassurance to the Assembly that the hospital project, that she fully supports it going where it is, and very soon, even though that may not have been her initial preference, and it may not be the preference of many of those who she surrounds herself with, or rather who she finds herself surrounded with. My concern is how much debt are we saddling future generations with, and is it justified, and is it proportionate? And the figures that we've seen from government, I think, don't stack up. I'm also disappointed actually that the government didn't just accept this amendment. I think if they wanted to prove to us that there should be no delay, rather than gambling on the strength of their argument and the strength of their figures, they should have got round the table with scrutiny and actually said, look, we can build this hospital for less, and if there are areas where we need more money, we'll come back to the Assembly as and when that spending is required with the relevant detail, and when we've made the case, that money will be released by the Assembly when they're satisfied. Now, one of the points that has really, I think, the more I've heard of it, it frustrated me, this gun to the head analogy, this idea that members are having a gun put to their head. And what I'd like to do is dismantle that argument and dismantle the gun, indeed. And I'll be doing that with the help of Monty Python. So for the slight relief perhaps of members in the Assembly like Deputy Morell and Deputy Ash, there will be others who I know are big fans of Monty Python. What I would say is that, first of all, when dealing with an assailant with a weapon, you have to disarm the assailant. Luckily, what we have with the Council of Ministers here isn't a gun to the head, it's actually just a banana in a sock, which they're pointing at us. And when you take the sock off, you realise that the Council of Ministers are actually just standing there with a banana, and that they can do no harm. And as Monty Python showed us with the great John Cleese playing the drill sergeant type self-defense instructor in that great sketch about self-defense against soft fruit, he says you get the banana off him and you peel the banana and then you eat the banana, thus disarming him. And of course, what we realise here is that we don't have a gun to the head at all. We have a banana, and that the banana can do us no harm, because in fact, the gun to the head is saying that there will be delay. If we don't do this, there will be delays if you don't give us the exact money that we need to. But of course, that's not true. There won't be any delays over this. And then we're told, but scrutiny haven't told us, haven't proved to us that there won't be any delays. And this is where we encounter one of those logical fallacies that's being put forward again in the arguments over the last 2 days, is that you don't need to prove a negative. So I don't need to prove to somebody that the Loch Ness Monster does not exist. You need to prove to me that the Loch Ness Monster does exist. And you do that either by providing photographic evidence in this case, or providing perhaps some evidence, evidence that the Loch Ness Monster does exist, either a footprint or some discharge that has been left and could only have been left by a Loch Ness Monster at the bottom of Loch Ness. What's even stranger is that there's not been any shortage of opportunities for the Council of Ministers who don't support this amendment to come forward and tell us what the delays will be. They're just saying, well, you can't prove that there won't be delays. If they said to us, look, there will definitely be a delay because we have to go back to the drawing board and talk to the, and we'll have to change X, Y, and Z, that's why there'll be a delay. But of course, they haven't done that, and they can't do that because there is an overwhelming, there's an overwhelming desire and a strong message from this Assembly to get on with it. And that strong message is also coming from the public. And that brings me to the next point, which is that, again, we find ourselves in a situation where the Council of Ministers are taking the Assembly and they're taking scrutiny for granted, but primarily in this case, they're taking the Assembly for granted because they're saying, look, we've already spoken to the builder and we've told them we want them to build us an £800 million hospital. In parenthesis, by the way, is that we're not building an £800 million hospital, we're building a £311 million hospital, and the rest of it is ancillary. I'm not saying it's not necessary, but it's not directly for the hospital build. The builders are building us a £311 million hospital. At least that's what they've been asked to do. The problem is with that and the whole package that goes around it, and I don't need to reiterate the fact that there are so many contingencies in there, and I believe so much double accounting that's gone on in there. Yes, of course, it's very prudent budgeting in the sense that it's probably vastly more than this government actually needs to spend on the hospital. But that's exactly why scrutiny have come back and said, look, you don't need this money. And it might be fair enough to do that if it was our own money. The idea that there is cheap credit out there. Now, if you were taking out a loan and you needed to do some building work, I have some very recent experience of this. You might go to the bank and say, I'd like to borrow £10,000 because actually knowing full well that what you need to build your renovations would only cost you £7,000 or £8,000, and you keep £2,000 or £3,000 in the bank. And like Deputy Hewlin told us, and I think this might have been a slip, because I think when he was speaking, not a slip in the sense that it's not true, but a slip in the sense that it is true, and it revealed something which may be central to government's thinking, is he said, and if we borrow too much money, of course, we can just give it back or keep it. And I think that might be okay if you're doing that with your own money, but why would we borrow much more money than we need to when it's got to be underwritten one way or the other by the public, and it's got to be paid back by generations. And I say that saying that I don't have a problem with borrowing, and I think that's the right model when we do borrow now, whilst the credit is cheap, rather than spending our reserves, and we keep the reserves in the bank to ensure future credit. That doesn't mean that there might not be times we need to spend some of that we've got. So my concern is, we've already had an admission from the Assistant Chief Minister there that it doesn't matter if we borrow too much because we can keep it or pay it back. I'll say no, I think we should only borrow exactly what we need to. And then if you need more money, the prudent thing to do is for this government or any future government to come back and ask for more money. My concern is, again, that the Assembly is being taken for granted. If I were to speak to a builder and say, look, I want you to put an extension on my house, but I haven't spoken to my wife yet, by the way, but I'll speak to her when she comes back, and it'll all be fine. You know, it'll all be fine. So I say, I want you to put this extension on. I want you to use this kind of, absolutely the best materials. That goes without saying, because I want the best for my house and for my wife. And then my wife comes back and says, actually, we can't afford that. We can only afford this, and even if we borrow, so I have to then go back to the builder, and I'll be embarrassed and say, well, yeah, I don't think we can use that, that tungsten, that top quality tungsten. I think we're going to have to go for slightly cheaper but perfectly adequate material, which actually doesn't affect the quality of the build at all, and it's just as strong. It's just I might have to swallow some pride. But the point is, I shouldn't have said to the builder to go ahead with that project, because I knew that in order for it to be signed off and paid for, I needed the consent of my wife. And I think this is what's happened with the hospital project, is we've got the Council of Ministers trying to threaten with their banana to our heads the fact that, oh, well, there will be delays because what we don't know if the builder will build a £500 million hospital for us. We'll have to talk to them, but actually the builder should build what we ask them to. They are our servants, and they don't know, the Council of Ministers don't know what's going to be approved by this Assembly until the Assembly has set the budget and told them to go ahead. So I think we've seen so many red herrings here from the Council of Ministers who haven't told us and know that actually this won't delay the project at all, that the delay won't happen, that the project will go ahead, and it will go ahead at Overdale. So in the sense we're arguing not about the principle, we're arguing about some fine detail here. Now I do want to make some more general comments, sir, and I'm coming towards the end, and I know it's been a long debate, But I think we all talk to members of the community, especially some of the older generation who perhaps have more time to come and talk to us, who also have experience about either using the hospital directly for them or for their loved ones, or anticipating the need to look at it and to use it in the future. And what they've told me, and which is also my concern, is that they're largely concerned not simply about the fabric of the building, but about what kind of care is going to be provided for in that building. And whilst Deputy Ash says, oh, you know, what do we want? Some kind of American style of healthcare? My concern is that from what I've heard, the alarm bells that go off in my head when I've been to the presentations is that it seems to be overly predicated, this healthcare model, on private insurance and on private healthcare. And of course, it's perhaps natural that a long list of consultants in Jersey who are also doing private practice would want us to build the best and most expensive hospital that money can buy. And I would say to Deputy Martin, I want to see the best hospital in Jersey, not that money can buy, but the best hospital that we can possibly afford. And inside that hospital, I also want to know that we have healthcare workers, whether they're doctors, nurses, whatever their job is, cleaners in the hospital, who are respected, who are well remunerated. And I want to know that if we have a mental health care facility in Jersey, that actually we don't just blow all the money on a nice shiny building for mental health to tick the boxes, but that actually we address some of the underlying issues that lead to people in Jersey having acute and aggravated mental health issues. And what are those issues? And this ties in also with some of the reasons I believe that we have a staffing crisis, not just at the hospital, but more generally in Jersey and also in the care sector, in the wider care sector. It isn't simply that the building isn't fit for purpose, and we don't need to make those arguments anymore. We know the building isn't fit for purpose. We need to make sure that people aren't working long hours because they're in poverty wage jobs, that they're doing two jobs, that they don't get to see their children, that we're not storing up problems for the future, where people are incredibly stressed, where young people and young families are actually falling into despair because they're seeing rental prices in Jersey going through the roof. And they're also seeing the fact that they, no matter how hard they work, they're never going to be able to afford their own homes in our island. And this is exactly a problem for those in healthcare. The reason people are not coming over to work in our hospital is not simply because there are material issues in the fabric of the building. Because remember, doctors and nurses go all around the world to work in areas which don't even have proper hospitals because they're motivated by delivering health, often in adverse circumstances. But the reality is that why would you come to Jersey to where you've got to spend ages trying to find somewhere to rent, where you probably can't ever buy, and you may not even be allowed to buy, depending on the housing qualification that you've got, rather than go somewhere else that actually truly values you. And I don't see that any of this is truly being addressed, and we're just focusing on the size and the shell of the hospital. Now, 75% private beds, that sounds great, doesn't it? And we're saying, oh, but we don't want people dying in wards. We prefer them to be dying in their private beds. Now, is it just me who ask themselves, why are we sending people to hospital to die? It doesn't matter whether you're in a private bed or in a ward. You shouldn't be going into hospital to die. Hospitals are about making people better. There is palliative care there if people have end-of-life issues, or people generally, I suspect, also prefer to die in their own home surrounded by their loved ones, not in a private bedroom, in a hospital, or in a ward in a hospital. And I think there are two separate issues here, because if those 75% of private beds need to be funded through a model which relies on the fact, and I heard it in the presentation, it relies on the fact that we know that so many people in Jersey have private healthcare that isn't used. It's provided by their jobs, but they don't use it. That's what one of the officers told us in the presentation, and that there's a presumption that we want to get more people to use their private healthcare rather than it costing government any money. And of course, if you've overextended on your credit by taking out £800 million loan rather than something in the region of 500 million, you may well try and find inventive ways of trying to repay that debt. And what we know from this government and previous governments is that they never fund the public good through progressive or even neutral taxation. It always ends up being regressive taxation. So of course the consultants at the hospital will sign a letter and say we want a hospital and we want it now. And I hope that in future they also lobby us on other issues. And I also note that when the nurses came out, the public sector workers, also the ancillary care workers in the community, saying that they wanted better working conditions, we know who was standing there shoulder to shoulder with them. It was Reform Jersey and some other members in the Assembly and the trade unions. It wasn't this Council of Ministers who speaks so highly now of their doctors at the hospital simply because they happen to agree with them. It's political convenience, nothing more. I'm also concerned, I have to address these points, I'm afraid, when the Housing Minister again seemed to take not just the Assembly this time, but the residents of Llanelli for granted when he said, look, I need this hospital to be built right now so that it can unlock other sites for housing like Llanelli. What does he mean by that? Is there a presumption that the old Llanelli school site will be released to him for housing? Because if that is his presumption, then he's got a battle on his hands from the residents of Llanelli and myself potentially, because until we know what the options are for the old Llanelli school site, we simply won't roll over to accept that that should be some more high density housing, whether it's social or whatever it is. There are many of us who firmly believe that should be a community use of that site, and that there should be no presumption that it should be housing. And again, it just shows that the government has been making all these plans, sitting around their tables, moving the pieces around the jigsaw puzzle without taking the community with them. And I think this is what we've seen here, is that there's this argument that's being put forward that seems to belittle and undermine anybody who doesn't want the government's proposal versus what scrutiny is putting forward, simply because and saying, well, you know, it's going to delay this. You're not, you don't really care about the community you live in. But when there's so much widespread concern about the proposals being put forward from the left, right, the centre, from all sorts of people in Jersey, I think government would do better to actually say we've listened, and in hindsight they should have accepted this amendment. Now, I don't know whether the government's going to win today or whether scrutiny will get their amendment through. What I do know is that if we support the amendment today and we give the green light for the Council of Ministers to go ahead and build this hospital within the parameters that have been set, with the proviso that they can come back for more money when they justify it, if there are additional costs that they believe are absolutely necessary, then that will go ahead. Whereas if we don't do that, we have a highly divided Assembly, we have a highly divided island, I believe, on this issue, and they haven't taken the public or the Assembly with them. And they might win this by 24 votes to 22, who knows? But that, I believe, will be a Pyrrhic victory for them. And I think the sensible way forward that we can all agree on consensually is to support the detailed recommendations that have been put forward by scrutiny, sir. And I encourage members to think about being fiscally responsible, but as well as socially responsible, and delivering this with an envelope which is both realistic and can deliver excellent healthcare, not just in terms of the building, but in terms of the actual care that is provided in the community and at this Overdale site, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Sir Martin.
Thank you, sir. So this is a debate about borrowing money. the fact that this borrowing is for a hospital is actually somewhat secondary, because this is a debate about the best financial plan to fund the largest piece of infrastructure we will ever build. And it's also a debate about the future. And it's the future that's important, because it's not those here in the Assembly today, those making the decision, that will ultimately have to pay for the borrowing. That will be future generations of taxpayers, of islanders, but not us. So, sir, this isn't a debate about whether we want to fund a new hospital, because we do. It's a debate about how we fund a new hospital. Despite the efforts of others, most namely the Chief Minister and the Health Minister yesterday, this is not a debate about the site, flawed as the decision to build at Overdale is, in my opinion, with many tens of millions of pounds to be wasted on an unnecessary road and tens of millions of pounds to be spent on an unagreed and yet unapproved relocation to Kennebay, which will create absolute chaos for the residents there. It's not about the fact that the site will not pass the planning process. And I remind members that we will do well to remember the words of the independent planning inspector, who asked if there were alternative sites to Gloucester Street that would clearly avoid the adverse effects of building on that site, the current site. The inspector's finding was that, based on the evidence before him, the answer was a very clear no. Sir, the Chief Minister tried to explain lots of things in his long speech yesterday, but he failed to explain why he wants all this money agreed before he has even submitted a planning application, let alone had it passed. So this isn't even a debate about whether we should just do it, as so many say, because if you really want to just get on and just do it, then we need to look again and decide to renovate, rebuild and build new on and around the current site in Gloucester Street, sir, because the unsuccessful planning application, the previous scheme mentioned by the planning minister, interesting that he spoke in this debate, sir, is still, even today, much further advanced than the current plan we're talking about. And it's not surprising that the application has yet been submitted for Overdale, because the design still changes on a weekly basis. So if we want a less expensive build, if we want a build that's quicker to completion, if we want a location that can be accessed by the public of this island and is actually easier to get to, if we want a scheme that actually complies with our decision on the climate emergency and doesn't cover greenfields in car parks. So if we want all those things, then we need, even at this late stage, and not too late stage, we need to look away from Overdale. After all, we're going to spend over £100 million on Gloucester Street in the coming years, and that money must be well spent. So this is a debate about funding, and I'll try, as hard as it is for me, to concentrate on the proposition and the amendments. And I'd like to share with members a piece of advice I was given when I first started out in my own business career. Many years ago now. It was from my first bank manager when I turned up in his office and very confidently asked to borrow some money and set up an overdraft facility. He told me very clearly to go away, come back with a plan to show him how I would pay off any loan, and this so that my business was stable. So the previous bond taken out by the states to fund Andium was done with a clear business case, a clear way to fund the coupon, a clear income stream, and a way to pay for the borrowing. But sir, this proposed borrowing has certainly none of those. It has little certainty. Betting on the markets to fund the coupon. How often, sir, are we told that the value in investments can go down as well as up? Sir, my parents always taught me not to buy anything unless you know how to pay for it. Wise words that I have used all the way through my business life in the private sector, and ones that I hope States members will heed today. So I've been lucky. I've worked hard and enjoyed a relatively successful business career. But if anyone had walked into my office and put a proposition in front of me that had a 58% contingency in it, then I would be, at the very least, sending them back for more detail. More likely, I would thank them for their input and go away and get some advice from someone else who could provide proper, detailed costs and a much smaller profit margin and contingency. Even at this late stage and at the very point of making this big decision today, the numbers we have been given over the last 2 days are full of inconsistencies, sir. The cost of mental health yesterday was 40 to 50 million pounds, yet the table we were given on Monday showed its number as just over 12. We've been told recently that income from private healthcare was 3 million pounds. Yesterday, that number was over 10 million. There's also the confusion over the percentage of islanders who have private healthcare. So government can't even agree amongst themselves as to the right number. Just like the ever-changing design, the numbers we are given are all over the place and not where members should expect for a debate of this gravity. So if an individual goes into a shop at lunchtime to buy a pint of milk, they might be told the price for the milk is £1, but we're going to charge you £1.58. A young couple might go to buy some white goods in town, a washing machine, a spin dryer, or goods of that nature, and be told by the shop, well, the bill is £1,000, but they're going to ask you for over 1,500. A small business owner might want to purchase stock for the coming year and be told the value is £10,000, but actually you need to give us over 15,000. Or somebody might be going to build a property costed at £1 million to be told that they would need to find over 1.5 million to give to the builder. So I won't go on, but surely any of us that have any sort of business dealings, right from buying a pint of milk up to funding large multi-million pound developments, I say to you, think very carefully about these proposals. And I say to members that I think they can be sure of one thing today, and that's if we vote over £800 million to this project, then it will be spent. So I urge members to consider the future, those future taxpayers, those future islanders. I cannot and will not support government plans and will subsequently be supporting the scrutiny amendments. I just say this in closing to members, £800 million. And I ask members to dwell on that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. There's a note in the chat from Deputy Higgins complaining that there's an echo. Deputy, there's no particular echo within the chamber itself. I'm not sure if anything can be done about it, but I'm sure if something can be done, the GREF will look at it. We'll look at it now. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak on the amendment, Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. It's always interesting to see who's marking you. I just want to say a number of things. First of all, before I start the substance of my speech, I do want to say that I think it's been unfortunate. There have been some rather sharp and unnecessary attacks on individuals in this assembly by members, particularly of the Alliance Party, I'm afraid. I think that's a real shame. I also want to say that, on a lighter note, that if socialism is defined by the amount of spending, then the Alliance Party sits in the most socialist government Jersey's ever had. So I think that's something that needs to be noted. But, sir, I also want to say that there is no bone in my body which wants to stop the hospital going ahead at Overdale. I'm not interested in sites. I'm not interested in, well, for the purpose of this debate, not interested in which wards, which services, which aren't there, what is there. Those are things for other debates and other days. I've been quite clear with Senator Farnham, who leads the hospital project. I've been quite clear that I am interested in two aspects of the hospital particularly. They are financing and parking. And today we're talking about financing, and that's where my interest lies, and that's the only interest I have in this today. Sir, back in 2014, if members cast their minds back, not to the hospital debates, but to the Russian invasion of Crimea, Vladimir Putin marched into Crimea and the world looked on astonished and disgusted and appalled. Members of this assembly felt the same way. In the 1690s, sir, Peter the Great of Russia also waged war in Crimea. So why was Vladimir Putin doing exactly what had happened 320 years earlier? The reason, sir, was because of geography. Russia has no 24/7, 52 weeks a year ports. All the ports that Peter the Great had were covered in ice half of the year. And once Ukraine started making overtures to the west, Vladimir Putin saw Crimea as his only 24/7, 52 weeks of a year port disappearing before his eyes. And so strategically, he was faced with exactly the same decision that Peter the Great had to take 320 years earlier from his perspective. And that was that he did not want to lose the 365 days a year access to the sea that would happen if Ukraine moved further towards the west. Geography determined his actions. Geography determines the actions of rulers today, 300 years ago, 3,000 years ago. In the 1940s, sir, the UK didn't defend these islands, the Channel Islands, because our geography meant that we were not strategically important within the scope of the wider world war. Indeed, in the 1940s, Churchill is reported to have said some very negative and quite nasty things about islanders, because he couldn't understand why we weren't resisting the Nazis more strongly. In making these comments, sir, he was showing his ignorance of Jersey's geography, but we have no mountains in which to hide and from which to launch guerrilla attacks. We were not an island that could stand up to the Nazis. Our geography did not lend itself to doing so. Times change, sir, technology progresses, but our geography never does. It does not matter how fast our internet speeds are or how regular the daily flights to London. We live on a tiny island with no natural resources, no exploited natural resources, and with just 100,000 people. That doesn't change. Sir, these are the things that are guiding my thinking today. Jersey's geography is Jersey's geography. It will not change. The vulnerability that our geography lends to us will not change. And sir, through this speech, I'm going to call on the thoughts of a political thinker some 4 years ago, who in this assembly, sir, really did sum up exactly how I feel today. And sir, one of those first things is the idea that debt is addictive. These were the words of the now Senator John Le Fondre in 2017 when addressing the financial funding of the Gloucester Street Hospital site. His view was that debt is addictive, and in his view, it is not in the Jersey psyche. He said that we have moved in the time that he had, in that point in 2017, been in this assembly into a borrowing culture. Sir, these words ring true to me today. When I look at the hospital funding, I do not look just at the £800 million for the hospital. I look at the £250 million for Andium. And I look at the £400 million for the pension liability. And I look at the £300 million for the COVID debt. Sir, in the words of Senator Le Pondre in 2017, how do we justify what we are doing and the potential extra cost? Trust me, does not work, I am afraid, not on 0.5 billion pounds. Well, sir, today we are 1.2 billion pounds further in than that 0.5 billion pounds. We are looking at 1.7 billion pounds. And it is the totality of that debt that is my concern. So yesterday, Senator Le Pondre referred to me, and I remember it's the point of order that I raised or tried to raise, sir, that, you know, we are not a household budget, I know this. But, sir, we are also not a nation state. We are planning for the next 40 years today. Whether we like that or not, that is what we are doing. Because whatever debt we take on, whether it's the 400 million or the 800 million, that is going to be around the necks of islanders for the next 40 years. And in, sir, 40 years' time, it's quite possible I won't be here, more likely than not, I would suggest. In 40 years' time, most of us in this assembly will not be here. We will have gone to far better shores, I'm sure. But, sir, the consequences of the decision we take today will be here. That's the reality of what we're dealing with. That is 40 years. Senator Le Pondre yesterday suggested that household budgeting is much more short-term. I want to reassure Senator Le Pondre that I am not thinking in a short-term manner here. I'm thinking very much in a long-term manner. Over the next 40 years, that is 40 years in which the ability for future generations to borrow or indeed use the strategic reserve will be rendered uncertain, precisely because debt is not endless. There is a limit to the amount that we will be able to refinance should we ever have economic problems in the future. We are not a sovereign nation. We cannot print money. It was interesting that in one of the many reports, the Treasury Minister has cited Norway and Qatar as nations with strong credit ratings because of the strength of their reserves. But what the Minister ignores in that ill-fitting analysis is not only are Norway and Qatar sovereign nations with the ability to print their own currencies, but their geography determines that they sit on enormous oil reserves. Last I checked, Jersey didn't enjoy the same benefit. At best, we have the speculative possibility of developing renewable energy to trade at some unknown point in the future. Sir, unlike Deputy Truscott, I am rarely comforted by the words of the Treasury Minister. And indeed, on Tuesday, we learned that not only are her judgments in this particular matter of this financing based entirely on the belief that investment returns of the past 40 years will continue into the future, but she doesn't actually have any plan in the event that those returns don't cover the cost of interest payments. Indeed, from that, we can surmise that Senator Le Pondre was correct back in 2017 when he expressed exactly the same concerns, and I quote from Hansard. Now, the argument is, well, we'll have to take other measures. That's exactly what the Treasurer said to me in a briefing 1 or 2 weeks ago about this matter. We'll have to find other ways and take other measures. And Senator Le Pondre continued in 2017, well, those other measures can only be put taxes up. If your economy is in difficulties, he continued, the last thing you want to be doing is pricing yourself out of the market. In an economic crisis, you want to put taxes up? Sir, in 2017, the now Chief Minister expressed his aversion to taking such risks in advance of Brexit uncertainty. That was the context he placed those comments in. Well, sir, Brexit in 2021 is far from settled. We see this literally in this island every day. But now we also have a pandemic. We have saber rattling between China, the US, Australia, and indeed the UK. We have relationships with France breaking down before our eyes. Supply chains are being eroded, and we are beset by enormous inflationary pressures, which will lead to higher interest rates in the coming year, indeed possibly by the end of this year. We are in the midst of enormous geopolitical shifts, and they affect all of us, whether we like it or not, and those shifts create enormous uncertainty. Uncertainty which means that not just future generations, but indeed our own generation may well need to resort to the strategic reserve for support. Well, should that be the case, the debt we would have incurred won't only stop us being able to actually use the reserve directly, but it will be needed to churn out the interest repayments on these debts. So we now know that the nature of the strategic reserve has changed forever, and I'm not against that, but we need to acknowledge it. The strategic reserve, should the reserve be needed, we would have to use it indirectly by leveraging it for more debt. And in an emergency, we won't be able to pick and choose interest rates. We'll have to pay all that the market demands. And from next year or sooner, it will be higher than the 2% we're suggesting today. And of course, at some point, if times are really bad, the markets will actually stop lending to Jersey because we are not a sovereign nation. We have no exploited natural resources. We have an enormously imbalanced and honestly vulnerable economy. And we will have a reserve tied up and paying for projects like this hospital. So when I am faced with these realities, rather than take the head in the sand approach of the Treasury Minister, I try to face them and ask myself, well, given these realities, should we borrow to the maximum extent? Or should we moderate our borrowing on a project like the hospital to ensure we have greater resilience for this tiny, vulnerable island? And in so doing, leave options for safety nets that we and future generations can use. And so, sir, in the very worst of times, what happens in the event of default? We heard yesterday that the UK may not have a constitutional duty to intervene in such a situation. But the reality is the UK is likely to be our first port of call because we won't be able to go to the IMF. We are not a sovereign nation. We won't be able to go to the World Bank. We are not a sovereign nation. We will just have to go and turn to Westminster, should we not at some point in the future be able to pay our debt. And if we do that, if on any given day in the future we ever turn to the UK to ask for help financially, that is the day that this island loses its autonomy. Sir, I have shown that my position must be one that is clearly understood by the Chief Minister because it completely mirrors his position of 4 years ago. I am not motivated by party politics or personality politics. I want this government to get going and build a hospital at Overdale. But when faced with the stark realities of today's world, of the unchanging realities of Jersey's geography, I find that my position is best expressed in the words of Senator Lafondre in 2017. I am cautious. I am slightly risk averse. What my concern is the level of debt that our future generations will have to fund if we have a problem. Those were the Senator's words, or then Deputy's words, as written in Hands Up. Sir, that is my sole concern. And so an amendment that tries to enforce fiscal discipline is one that, given my and the Senator's former views, I feel compelled to support. Because to do otherwise would be reckless and, in my mind, deeply irresponsible. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Guida.
Thank you, sir. There'll be a couple of parts to this. I had a very nice speech written, but funnily enough, it seems that the absolute basics of this are still not being understood. So I'll have to start from scratch. First of all this is actually quite simple. It's not very complicated. You know, we're asking for more detail and more data, and I think we're about 1,700 pages of reports so far, but that's not enough. We still need a little bit more. No, the larger the project, actually, usually, the simpler the principles. Because if simple principles don't work, when a project is that complex, there is no chance in the world that it will work. There's just no chance. So if you want to build an IKEA somewhere, first principle, you need a 1 million people catchment area within 20 minutes. And they don't look at the cost of doorknobs and they don't look at the cost of square meters. They look at, do you have 1 million people within 20 minutes? For a hospital, it's very, very simple. And it's quite funny that we didn't apply that earlier. The size is incompressible. It's the size you need. It's not the size you want. It's not the size you'd like to have. It's the size you need. You look at your needs, your health needs, and you apply that. It's not, we'll have, it's like a school, you know, we have 500 students. We need a 500 student school. So let's look at this from the beginning. Let's make a 300 student school, or let's make a 250 student school, or 400 student school. If you need a school for 500 students, you build a school for 500 students. You don't look at anything else. You just build a school for 500 students. The size of hospital is defined by your needs. The second most important thing is the access. If you cannot get to the hospital, you might as well not have it. And that's inescapable. And unfortunately, we've looked at this and didn't think of the access half of the time, but this is absolutely essential. And I still can't believe that we're discussing square meters of access, where access is the second most important thing for a hospital. If an ambulance cannot get to your hospital because there's a bicycle on the way, then it might as well not be there. So access is absolutely essential. I know we're going to discuss this again in the near future, but there shouldn't be a discussion. Access is essential. One last thing, which is very important and quite unique to a hospital, is flexibility. Flexibility is very important. It's not essential. You can have a closed hospital that doesn't move for 50 years. But the truth is, health changes every 6 months. The way we apply health, the way we use health, the way we expect health changes every 6 months. I can't believe that we've been talking about private rooms by saying, oh my God, we need to be, and I'm not talking about private patients, I'm talking about rooms with one bed. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about 100, 100 rooms for private patients. We're talking about rooms with one bed. And we think that that's a little bit exotic. We've just had COVID. We've just had 18 months of COVID. Do you want your patients to give COVID to each other? Do you want your patients to give MRSA to each other? Do you want your patients to die in front of each other? You know, do you want to suffer from the after effects of your sex change with another 5 people in your room? Of course not. And what about privacy in general? We know that there is a massive drive towards privacy in health. We've lost it in everything else. Our bank accounts are public, but there's a massive drive to privacy in health. If you're in a room with 6 people, I'm sorry, there isn't privacy. So we've been discussing, we've been discussing private rooms like that's a luxury that maybe we shouldn't be affording. Mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. Now size, let's go back to size. The current hospital, I don't think anybody in this room can say that it's plenty large, it's got plenty of spare space, and they should have a few gardens in it because there's so much unwanted space. I don't think so. It's 40,000 square meters. It is actually an illegal building. If we rebuilt it now, we would not be allowed to run it. We would have to make it for the same services, for exactly the same services. We would have to make it 55,000 square meters to make it barely legal. Not comfortable, not better, barely legal. That is what is needed. And we're talking about reducing that, about making it smaller because somehow our needs have decreased. So what, the population is smaller? I haven't noticed that. The population is younger, it's healthier. I haven't noticed that either. You know, this is very weird. There's less need for health, there's less treatments available. The treatments are less complex, you know, it's just a pill. It's not those 3 months of extremely complex cancer therapy. Just have a pill. That's how it works now. So you don't really need to go to the hospital. Treatments are more complex. New treatments come in all the time. We have a larger population. We will have a much larger population in the next 50 years. And an older population. So we need more space. If we just add to those 55,000 square meters, mental health, and the services already existing in Overdale, that's 65,000 square meters. And that's what we're working on. 65,000 square meters. So who in this room is going to come back and say, well, somehow for the next 50 years, we need 2/3 of that, and that will be enough. That will be okay. 2/3, 40,000, let's go back to 40,000 square meters. We can shoehorn everything back into Gloucester Street, and that will be fine. And I really like somebody in this room to come up and say that, exactly like that. 40,000 square meters, 2/3 of our existing health capacity will be enough to serve the needs of this island to 2076. And I've heard incredible things. Now, so size is not compressible. We cannot make a hospital that does anything for this island for less than 65,000 square meters. It is not possible. It does not exist. Not in this universe. The price. Now, and it's a little bit sad because I have a vague recollection that there is a finance law that says you cannot start a project until you've gotten approval from the Assembly for the total expense of the budget, including contingencies. So if you don't have a full plan, if you don't have a very detailed plan with everything in it, you cannot start your project. And now, excuse our chief minister for being a chartered accountant and actually doing it properly. And instead of, oh my God, yes, it's a lot of money, but you've put everything in it. Everything is in it. Or we get castigated. Oh, no, start with something smaller and come back for more. Well, I'm sorry, that is illegal. We just cannot do it. We have to have the whole plan on paper, approved by this Assembly, or we cannot put a brick on the ground. We cannot put a spade in the ground. Now let's look at all this money that we're spending. 311 million for the build. Now that's people and sacks of cement. That's the very, very basic figure. It's easy for planners to do it. You know that you have a wall, that's so many breeze blocks, so much cement, you make a list. Design. Well, your architect has to do that design. It's usually about 10% cost. So 33 million pounds for design. 34 million pounds for land. Now, who would think for 1 second that considering that we have to acquire most of this land by compulsory purchase order, we're going to go out of our way to collect, extra stuff that we don't need. This is the absolute necessary land. There's no other way of doing it. And because we're doing it through compulsory purchase order, the price has to be right. We're not negotiating crazy prices. Those have been calculated. 44 million overhead and profit. Now that's a funny one because nobody seems to understand that. Oh my God, our builder is going to make 44 million. First of all, this figure normally should be between 25 and 50%. When your builder comes to your home and does something for you, he takes 50% overhead. And that's the minimum. He can do more. If he's an electrician or plumber, he's going to take massively more. But he takes 50% overhead. 10% is actually a little bit short. It's actually very, very tight. You need to negotiate very well with somebody to say, within 10%, you're going to be able to do all the overhead, all the management of all these things, and keep a little bit of money for afterwards. Have your own contingencies. That's going to be very, very difficult. This is actually quite a low figure. Altogether, so that if you were building a home, that's what it would cost you. None of you cannot evade any of those costs. Altogether, it's 422 million. Now, 65,000 square meters at 422 million is 6,200 pounds per square meter. That sounds like a lot of money. Has anybody bought an apartment recently? Or maybe a house? Or maybe a small office? You cannot get any of these. You cannot build any of these for 6,000 pounds. It's 7, it's 7.5, it's 8. And we're talking about apartments, not the most complex building that we can build. A hospital is residential, it's commercial, it's industrial all at once. There are more regulations for building a hospital than almost any other building on Earth except a space shuttle. It's the most complex building you can have. And here we have a price per square meter which is cheaper than an apartment in town. So who here can say, oh, that's a bit expensive. We should really have it for less, because it doesn't make sense. Look in Madeira, they have it for less. You know, well, sorry, if you cannot get an apartment for less than £7,000 or £8,000 per square meter, you're not going to get your hospital. It's quite a bit more complicated. Equipment, well, fortunately, nobody worried too much about the equipment. It's about 15% of the total. Well, an MRI machine is 3 million. A CAT scan is 3 million. An operating theater is 3 million. It goes on. And each of the room have gases, electricity, monitoring machines, 56 million. Yes, no problem at all. Again, if I'm wrong, I want to be told that 56 million is really, really, really too much to equip an hospital. That 15%, I mean, your home has more than 15% equipment costs. And now we're talking about a really, really specialized building. Inflation, well, inflation is something that we will have to think a lot about very soon. And I'd like to bring this now, because this is going to hit us. This is going to be a very big problem in the future. Could be an advantage to us, but it might be a problem. We've put 34 million in inflation. We've used the current rates. We've looked at the total. Again, take your calculator and prove me wrong. Preliminaries. Now that's a very interesting one. 53 million. Well, preliminaries, basically, they've been spent. That's the amount of money we've spent talking to everybody, making new plans, saying, oh, you don't like the roof? Here's a new roof. Here's a new way of doing it. So preliminaries is money already spent. It's very, very difficult to take off a project. But it is also very important money, because that's how we make the right project. That's how we make sure that this money is well allocated and that this is actually the budget that we need. PCSA is the pre-construction service agreement. And basically, it's a little bit like the conversation you'd have with your builder before he goes onto your roof and fixes it. When you do that with 100 engineers and a company that you've contracted for 300 million, you have to pay for it. You don't get it for free. You don't have this little chat and so the slates, if we could do them like this. No, it doesn't happen like that. You have to pay for it. So until you actually have a contract with them, you can work with them, design with them, make sure that they can provide what you need in the end, and you need to pay for it. It's not free. It doesn't come free. Again, if you think that this money is poorly spent and that we shouldn't, or that there's a way of saving it, please come back and tell me that this money is poorly spent. Contingencies, a total of 108 million pounds contingencies. Now, again, we are forced to put them there. It is something that is a legal requirement. We have to count contingencies. Now, it's a 4-year project. What could happen? Usually, if it's your build, if it's your home, you think, oh, at the last minute, I might want a room to look a little bit different, or add a window, so I put 5% just in case. Well, when it's a project like that, and I'm going to go to extremes now. I'm going to really, really look at stuff that would never happen in a million years. But say you have a pandemic, and for 6 months there's no communications. You cannot get your materials, and all your workers are isolating. You know, I know this is very, very far-fetched, but it happens. It could happen. It might happen. So unfortunately, when it's a project that size, and you've got 1,000 workers taking up all your hotels in town and having to be paid while they are isolated, while this thing goes around, yeah, it takes up a lot of money. And first of all, we are legally obliged to think about those things, but also the contractor will make sure that we are ready for those kinds of things, because otherwise they will not sign a contract with us. If they see that, oh yeah, we've got just the right amount of money, not a pound more, and yes, if there is a little problem like that and you're stopped and it's our fault or it's an act of God, it doesn't matter very much. They will just not sign with us. They want to make sure that we can cover that those things can be predicted, that we are prepared for it. And it is a legal requirement. We have to be absolutely certain that when we put the first brick on the ground, we can put the last brick on the ground and that the hospital is delivered. And all of it is there. And again, it's not complicated. You know, I've built small things. I've spent a few billion pounds building stuff, so I've got a vague idea. I've never built a hospital. The people who built hospitals here are our people, our civil servants. They've been doing this for 10 years. They've actually built one. They are the people we know. And of course, they are the last people that we ask. You know, we just pick people off the street and ask their ideas. So yeah, this is not complicated. What I've done is, you know, a bit of an envelope and a calculator. Come back to me and explain to me why 10% design is too much when any architect will take that anyway, and we're talking about something absolutely massive. Explain to me why 56 million of equipment is too much for a hospital. I'm ready to listen. I am really ready to listen. But all this means that if we want 65,000 square meters of hospital, we need to pay 700 and some million, and there might be contingencies. But it's something that might happen. So the size, I think we've discussed. Reduction in wards. Well, yes, again, population, you know, shrinking and becoming more sheltered. So atriums and beautification. Sorry, we're going to have the most visible building in the island, and it can be a bunker. That's fine. Also, beautification is actually a tiny cost. It's not very important. We did it for the energy for waste plant. That thing cost us quite a bit more money just to make square. It was not necessary. We just beautified it because, well, it looks better if it's a block. We spent money on that, and I think that was too much money. The hospital will be much less expensive to make look right, and we've worked on it. Oh yes, I forgot a very important figure. The government of Jersey team, 39 million. Now we're talking about several years, quite a number of our people working to do stuff with the hospital. I wonder what they're going to do. They'll verify stuff. Because of course we scrutinize everything we do. So whatever the contractor is going to do, they're scrutinized. When they spend money, when they ask us for money, they'll make sure it's scrutinized. And that scrutiny will be checked. And those checks, they'll be scrutinized. And then there'll be reports written. And somebody will probably ask for an inquiry. So of course we'll have to do this inquiry. Well, oh, I forgot about the reviews, of course, and the reports. So yeah, somebody needs to do that. And unfortunately, but most importantly, that's our supervision. That's to make sure that things happen properly. And yes, they're expensive because there are many very high level people. They need to understand what's going on. Yes, we've discussed about other things. The knowledge center, let's not have that because it's not important to teach new nurses. Car park. I am working on carbon neutrality, but people going to hospital are going to use vehicle. I'm sorry, people going to hospital are going to use vehicles. Some of them will be using ambulances. Most of them will be using vehicles. They might be scooters, mopeds, cars. They need to go somewhere. And of course, and that's something. It's funny that we have to repeat this all the time. 800 people. There's 800 people working at that hospital. They go there at any time of the day. They need to be able to park somewhere. If they don't come from, you know, a convenient bus route or walking distance, they need to be able to park somewhere. There are 5,000 movements a day in our hospital, a small one. 5,000 movements a day. Well, even again, those use a very convenient shuttle bus lanes or climb up the hill or cycle up the hill, it's still quite a number of cars. There is no way that we can have somebody come to the hospital and find the parking full. We cannot have a full parking. I don't know if that has ever happened to you. It has happened to me to go to a hospital and find a full parking. And I cannot think of anything more horrible. I was lucky. I had, you know, a few minutes to spare to find somewhere else. But if you're in a hurry or if you're going to an appointment, and your problem is that the parking in the hospital might be full, it's a catastrophe. I mean, what a design problem. So yeah, let's lose the car park. It's not important. Highway works, well, I've said it before. If an ambulance cannot get there instantly at any time of the day, whatever the traffic load, but your hospital is elsewhere, it doesn't work. And I think that's about us. Now, financing option. So I don't think we can do this for less money than we've put down. We're talking about £696 million if you don't put in contingency. So that's our budget. That's our budget. It's almost 700 million pounds. I don't think, because I can use a calculator and the back of an envelope, I don't think that we can do the hospital for cheaper. Now, how do we finance this? Now, we are unbelievably lucky because we can get it for free. I mean, this is unique. This is unique in history that we could be able to provide this for free. If everything goes wrong, might have to pay for it. But we can, and we have to, because it is the hospital we need. But, you know, if a few things go our way, we can have it for free. Now, it's funny because we think about our reserves. Our reserves are a fund. They are a long-term investment fund. We're not trying to make a buck from one month to the other. We're not playing the market. We're looking at the long term. Between 1900 and 2000, anything invested in American blue chips made 10% a year. The average. Of course, if we wanted to sell in 1930 or 1929, you were in trouble. But if you kept it, made 10%, 10% over 100 years. We have a fund that has done 6% per year for the last 20 years. Now we say, oh, things could go wrong. Things have gone wrong. We've had the internet bubble. People lost their shirt. We've had 2008. So many companies went bankrupt. We've had COVID. Things have been wrong. But if you have a long-term fund, it's actually quite safe. Most of you do have a long-term fund. It's called a pension. You look at it every day thinking, my God, my pension is going down. It's over. I'll be destitute for the rest of your life. It's the same sort. It's actually very, very safe because it's long-term and it's a fund. It's managed. It's diverse. If we plan on 6% a year, we're very, very conservative. It's done that in horrible circumstances. It's done that in very bad circumstances. I wish my money had done 6% a year in the last 20 years. I cannot say that. So we have the very solid fund. And what can we do? Well, we can spend it and we don't have it anymore. We can use it. And spending it is silly. It's a little bit like having a business. You know, I'm a hairdresser, but I want a house. So what I'll do is that I'll sell the hairdresser business, and with the money, I'll buy a house. No, you keep being a hairdresser, and with your profit, you pay your mortgage. That's all we're doing. It's really not complicated. It's really, there's nothing special in that. That's all we're doing. And of course, this is our business. That's what we do. But that's what we do. I mean, we manage funds. We're good at that. We have decades and decades of history of being very good at managing funds. So why would all of a sudden say, no, this is not how you need to just put the money there and then we can forget about it? No, you use it properly. And of course, we're again talking about borrowing. Now there is one massive thing, a sin in borrowing, the ultimate sin, and it's very, very, very bad. It's borrowing for expenses. Now, if you borrow money to pay your day-to-day expenses, you are in very, very deep trouble. If you borrow money to buy an asset, even better, a productive asset, there is no problem. First of all, if I were, a rating agency and I looked at Jersey, I would say, well, okay, so they have 800 million here, and then they have an 800 million hospital asset. They have an 800 million hospital asset. They don't need to build one for the next year. They're fine. They're good. So yeah, that balances. And oh, wait a minute. They still have 3.5 billion pounds in cash. No other country does. There's 2 countries in the world. There are 2 countries in the world that have more reserves than Jersey. Every country in the world owes about 1 year of GDP. That's the average. And since COVID, it's gone worse. We don't have that debt. We have 3.5 billion, almost 1 year of GDP in actual cash. It's extraordinary. We're fine. We really don't have a problem. And what we will do is that we will borrow some amount of money against an asset, and our business will pay for it. So what's the problem? Yes, there's an absolutely tiny risk, but if that risk materializes, what will happen is exactly what we could do today. Just pay for it. So pay for it now, or try to grab it for free, and maybe pay for it in 20 years if there's an absolute catastrophe. No, do the right thing. Get it for free. It is extraordinary. I mean, to do something like that, to design something like that, and then to go to the public and say, your taxes will not rise. Can you imagine Boris Johnson saying that? You know, or Biden saying that? Oh yes, we've got this new thing. We're really going to improve your health, and your taxes will not rise. Oh no. Let's just spend the money or tax people more. It doesn't matter. Now the important stuff. Somehow, and I keep hearing it, but it is really annoying. Somehow there's this notion that if you completely overhaul a project, it doesn't take any time at all. That the timeline doesn't change. Now, we are trying to build 65,000 square meters of stuff in 4 years. Plus roads, plus gardens, plus all sorts of ancillary things, decanting, moving around, all this. We're trying to prepare a planning application for that. We're trying to have a public inquiry. We're trying to do all this in 4 years. Now, maybe not everybody has done so, but there is a timeline. And I'm pretty sure we've published it 5 times. There's a timeline on this. And the timeline is precise to the week. We do not have a spare week to deliver the hospital in time. If we want it in 2026, everything that we have planned needs to happen on the day we have planned it to happen. Anything goes wrong, and it is a delay. Anything, any small thing goes wrong, and it is a delay. Part of the cost. It's part of why this is expensive, is because we are racing against time. Now,
Deputy, I have to interrupt you. Standing orders require at this time that I ask if the states wish to continue or wish to adjourn. I suspect you have a little bit longer in your speech.
Maybe 5 minutes.
Yes, and it's a question of, do members wish to adjourn?
Yeah, propose the adjournment, please, sir.
Do you propose the adjournment? So the adjournment is proposed. That is, I think, probably the correct thing to do in the circumstances, for you to continue your speech after the adjournment. You've also been asked to give way for a point of clarification from the Connétable St John. It's a matter for you whether you do so, but you could perhaps reflect upon that over the lunch and adjournment.
I'm happy to answer immediately if needed.
Very well. Very well. I think, is the adjournment seconded?
Yes, sir.
The Assembly stands adjourned then until 2:50.
That must have been my longest speech in a long time.